They thought the village was quiet, peaceful, untouched by darkness. They were wrong. Welcome to Poirot Style Mysteries, where every whisper hides a secret, every smile conceals a lie, and every ordinary place may be the scene of something far more sinister. Here we don't just tell stories, we unravel them. Slowly, carefully, until the truth has nowhere left to hide. So listen closely, because in this story the dead do not forget, and the truth, it will terrify you. The first thing anyone noticed was the smell, faint, sweet, and utterly wrong for a spring morning in Bramblewick. It drifted lazily through the open windows of the tea room, curling around the porcelain cups and fresh scones as though it had every right to be there. Mrs. Dalrymple paused mid-pour, her hand trembling ever so slightly, and gave a delicate sniff. Oh dear," she murmured, her voice tightening as she set the teapot down with a soft clink. "That's not, is it?" Across the room, seated with impeccable posture and a gaze far too attentive for casual tea, Monsieur Alistair Poirot tilted his head just slightly. His fingers, poised elegantly around his cup, froze. His eyes narrowed, not in alarm but in recognition. "Inhale slowly, non," he said under his breath, almost gently. "That is not the scent of anything innocent." Outside, the village carried on in that deceptively peaceful rhythm it had perfected over decades. The bell above the bakery door jingled. A cart rattled over cobblestones. Somewhere a dog barked, sharp, insistent, then abruptly silent. But beneath it all, threading through the crisp air like an unwelcome whisper, that same scent lingered. Almonds, bitter almonds. Poirot set down his cup with precision. "Madame Dalrymple," he said, his tone courteous yet edged with something unmistakably firm, "I believe it would be wise to follow where that odor leads." She blinked at him, her cheeks paling. "You don't mean," gasped softly, "Oh heavens, no." But he was already rising, smoothing his waistcoat with practiced calm. There was no haste in his movements, and yet something about him had shifted, as though a quiet machine had begun turning behind his eyes. Outside, a small cluster of villagers had gathered near the florist's shop. Their murmurs were low, uneasy. A young boy stood on tiptoe, trying to peer between the adults, until his mother pulled him back with a sharp whisper. "Don't look, Thomas, just don't." Poirot approached, his shoes clicking softly against the stone. The crowd parted almost instinctively, as though they sensed something authoritative in his presence, even if they did not know why. And there, half hidden behind a display of freshly cut lilies, lay Mr. Edwin Pritchard. He was on his side, one hand curled near his chest, the other stretched out as though he had been reaching for something, or someone, just beyond his grasp. Face bore a peculiar stillness, not quite peaceful, not quite shocked. But it was his lips that told the true story, faintly tinged with blue. Poirot crouched beside him, his expression unreadable. "Soft exhale, mon pauvre ami," he murmured. "You have tasted something you should not have." "Is he?" someone whispered from the back. "Dead?" Poirot did not look up. "We." A collective shudder rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Henley, the florist, clutched the doorframe of her shop, her knuckles white. "I only stepped away for a moment," she said, her voice trembling. "He was just there arranging the tulips. He always did that, you know, even though it wasn't his job. Sniffs, always fussing over things that didn't concern him." Poirot's eyes flicked up briefly. "Ah, Monsieur Pritchard liked to involve himself." "Oh, constantly," she replied, almost defensively. "Always asking questions, always peering about. Harmless, of course. Just curious." "Curious?" Poirot repeated softly, as though tasting the word. A constable pushed his way through the crowd, slightly out of breath. "Right then, let's have some space. Everyone back, please." He paused when he noticed Poirot. "And you are a traveler," Poirot replied smoothly, rising to his feet, with an unfortunate talent for being present when death arrives. The constable frowned, clearly uncertain what to make of that. "Well, sir, I'll be taking over from here. By end sewer." Poirot stepped aside, but his gaze lingered on the body, sharp and calculating. "Tell me, officer, do you detect the odor?" The constable sniffed, then grimaced. Yeah, I do. Almonds, isn't it?" Poirot inclined his head. "Just so." There was a pause, a subtle shift in the air as realization began to dawn. "Poison," someone whispered. Poirot said nothing. Instead, he turned slowly, his eyes sweeping over the gathered villagers. And in that moment, something almost imperceptible passed across his face. Not suspicion, not yet, but interest. Because in a village like Bramblewick, where everyone knew everyone, and every habit, every routine was as predictable as the morning tide, poison did not arrive by accident. His gaze settled briefly on a man standing slightly apart from the others, a tall figure with a rigid posture and a jaw clenched just a little too tightly. The man met Poirot's eyes, then looked away, clearing his throat. Coughs lightly, and then there was the woman near the bakery door, her gloved hands twisting together as though wringing out an invisible cloth. She was staring not at the body, but at the ground beside it, as though searching for something that wasn't there. Poirot smiled faintly. "Interesting," he murmured, because already the dead man was beginning to speak. Not with words, of course, but with silences, with sense. With the subtle tremors of those he had left behind. And Poirot, ever patient, ever precise, was already listening. A breeze slipped down the narrow lane, stirring the petals of the lilies and carrying that bitter sweetness further into the village, as though determined that no one, not a single soul, would escape its quiet accusation. Poirot remained still for a moment longer, his gaze drifting not over the body now, but beyond it, to the shop itself. The florist's doorway stood half open, its brass bell swaying ever so slightly though no one had touched it. Soft creak back and forth, back and forth. "Madame Henley," he said gently, "you mentioned that you stepped away. For how long precisely?" She blinked, startled by the question. "I don't know exactly, perhaps 5 minutes, no more than that. I had to fetch water from the back. My assistant is off today, you see, so everything falls to me." Sighs shakily. "I was only gone a moment." 5 minutes, Poirot repeated, as if placing it carefully into an invisible puzzle. The constable crouched near the body, muttering something under his breath as he examined the pockets. "No sign of a struggle," he said aloud. "No vial, no glass, nothing obvious." "Of course not," Poirot murmured. The constable glanced up. "Beg pardon," Poirot offered a small, polite smile. Poison, when administered with intelligence, rarely leaves behind such conveniences. A murmur rippled through the onlookers again. Mrs. Dalrymple, who had followed at a cautious distance, pressed a handkerchief to her lips. "But who would do such a thing?" she whispered. Edwin was, well, he was Edwin, harmless, a bit nosy perhaps, but nosy, Poirot echoed again, softer this time. His eyes flicked back to the body, then slowly to the ground beside it. There, just near Mr. Pritchard's outstretched hand, lay a single crushed petal, not from the lilies. No, darker, richer. A deep, velvety red. Poirot crouched once more, careful, precise. He did not touch it immediately. Instead, he observed. Quiet inhale, the petal was bruised, its edges slightly curled as though it had been pressed between fingers or perhaps dropped in haste. "Madame Henley," he said without looking up, "do you sell roses of this shade?" She leaned forward, squinting. Yes, I do. They're inside near the counter." "Why?" Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he reached into his pocket, producing a pair of gloves, immaculate of course, and gently lifted the petal. "Because," he said softly, "this does not belong here." The constable frowned. "It's just a flower." Poirot glanced at him, his expression almost indulgent. "Ah, but in a place where everything has its order, mon ami, even a flower out of place becomes suspicious." A faint sound came from behind them, a quick intake of breath. Gasps quietly, Poirot's head turned at once. The woman near the bakery door. Her gloved hands had stilled now, frozen mid-twist. Her eyes, wide, bright with something dangerously close to panic, were fixed on the petal in Poirot's hand. "Madame," Poirot said, rising slowly, "you seem troubled." "I know," she stammered, shaking her head too quickly. It's dreadful, isn't it? All of it." "Indeed," Poirot agreed, stepping closer, his voice lowering just slightly. "And yet, you were not looking at the body." A pause. "The kind that stretches just a fraction too long." "I beg your pardon," she said, her voice tightening. "You were looking there." He gestured lightly to the ground where the petal had been, as though you expected to find something, or perhaps feared that someone else would. The silence that followed seemed to swallow the entire street. The constable straightened, suddenly alert. "Now see here," but Poirot raised a hand gently. "Patience." The woman swallowed, clears throat softly. "I think you're mistaken, sir. I was simply overwhelmed." "Ah," Poirot's smile returned, small and unreadable. "Yes, that is always a possibility." But his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than necessary, and then just as suddenly he turned away. "Tell me," he said, addressing no one and everyone at once, "who was the last person to speak with Monsieur Pritchard?" A few villagers exchanged glances. Then from the edge of the crowd, the tall man, the one with the rigid posture, stepped forward. "I was," he said. His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something tight, controlled. Poirot regarded him with interest. "And you are Arthur Bellamy?" He hesitated, then added, "I run the general store." "Ah, Monsieur Bellamy." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "And what did you discuss with the deceased?" Bellamy's jaw flexed. Nothing of importance. He was asking questions, as usual. What kind of questions? About deliveries, about stock, about things that weren't his concern. Exhaled sharply, he had a habit of poking his nose where it didn't belong. Yes, Poirot said quietly, I have heard this. Bellamy glanced at the body, then away again. I told him to mind his own business, that was all. And then I left. How long before he was found? Bellamy hesitated. 10 minutes, maybe less. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. Curious, he murmured, because 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a crushed petal, a missing vessel, a scent that lingered like a ghost. All of it danced together, just out of reach, like a melody half remembered. And somewhere within that melody there was a note, sharp, discordant, that did not belong. Poirot turned his gaze once more to the florist's shop. Madame Henley, he said softly, I wonder may I take a look inside? She nodded quickly. Of course, of course. As he stepped toward the doorway, the bell above it gave a soft, trembling ring. Ding, ding, and just before he crossed the threshold, Poirot paused. He did not turn around, but he spoke quietly, almost as if to himself. The dead do not forget, he murmured. A faint shiver passed through the crowd. And sometimes, he added, his voice barely above a whisper, they remember far more than the living would wish. Then he stepped inside, and the scent of almonds grew stronger. The moment Poirot crossed into the florist's shop, the air changed. It was warmer inside, thick with the mingling scents of damp stems, fresh soil, and blooming petals. But beneath it all, unmistakable now, was that same bitter trace. Stronger, sharper, no longer drifting, but rooted. Poirot paused just inside the doorway, allowing his eyes to adjust, his senses to settle. Inhale slowly. Yes, here, he murmured. This is where the truth begins to breathe. Behind him, the faint shuffle of shoes, hesitant, announced that at least one person had followed. The constable, of course, trying to appear authoritative despite the uncertainty etched across his face. Right, the constable said, clearing his throat. Cough slightly, let us be quick about this. Poirot did not respond. He had already begun to move. The shop was narrow but meticulously arranged. Rows of flowers lined the walls, each bundle tied neatly with twine, labeled in careful handwriting. Roses, tulips, peonies, orderly, deliberate. A place where nothing should be out of place. And yet... Poirot's gaze settled on the counter. A small glass vase stood near the edge, half filled with cloudy water. Inside it, a few stems leaned awkwardly, their leaves slightly wilted, as though they had been disturbed, then hastily returned. He approached it slowly. Madame Henley, he called, without raising his voice, this arrangement, is it recent? From the doorway her voice trembled in reply. Why, yes, I was preparing it this morning, for Mrs. Carroway's table. Poirot nodded faintly, though she could not see it. His gloved fingers hovered just above the rim of the vase. Then carefully he lifted it. The constable leaned closer, squinting. What is it? Poirot tilted the vase slightly, watching how the water moved. Clouded, he said softly. Unusual for something prepared so recently. He lowered it again, then reached for one of the stems. A rose, deep red, one petal missing. His eyes flickered just briefly. Ah, he breathed. Behind him, the constable shifted. You think that's from outside? I do not think, Poirot replied gently. I observe. He turned the stem slightly, examining its cut. Clean, precise, but not fresh, not quite, and then a faint sound from the back of the shop, a soft scrape. Shhkt. Poirot's head lifted at once. The constable froze. Did you hear? Yes. Another sound, quieter this time, almost nothing. Poirot set the rose down with deliberate care. Someone is here, he said. The constable straightened immediately. I'd stay behind me. But Poirot was already moving past him, his steps silent against the wooden floor, toward the narrow doorway at the back. The scent of almonds grew stronger with each step, not overwhelming but concentrated, intentional. He reached the doorway and paused, just for a second. Then gently he pushed it open. Creak, the room beyond was dimmer, lit only by a small window streaked with condensation. Buckets of water lined the walls. Gardening tools hung in precise rows. Everything again orderly. Except for one thing, a chair knocked slightly askew. Poirot's gaze dropped, and there on the wooden surface of a small worktable sat a teacup, half full, still. The liquid inside it was pale, almost innocent. Almost. Poirot stepped closer, his expression tightening ever so slightly. Mon Dieu, he whispered. The constable came up behind him. What is it? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he leaned in, just slightly, and inhaled. There it was, not faint now. Distant, but unmistakable. Almonds, he said. The constable sucked in a breath. Sharp inhale, you're saying this is… Yes, Poirot straightened slowly, a cup prepared and left. He turned his head slightly, his eyes scanning the room once more. No sign of struggle, no broken glass, no haste. A pause, which means the constable swallowed. He drank it willingly. Poirot nodded, or believed he did. Silence settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Then a faint drip. Drip, drip. Both men turned. In the far corner near one of the buckets, water was spilling slowly onto the floor. But that wasn't what caught Poirot's attention. It was what lay beside it, a glove, dark, elegant, and unmistakably out of place. Poirot approached it slowly, his eyes narrowing. Curious, he murmured. The constable followed, frowning. That doesn't belong to… No, Poirot said softly. It does not belong here. He crouched, studying it closely. Fine material, well made. Not the sort worn for gardening. And then, just barely visible along the edge, a faint stain. Poirot's breath stilled. Not dirt, not water, but something darker. Something that had soaked into the fabric and dried. Behind him, the constable shifted uneasily. What is it? Poirot did not look up. Tell me, he said quietly, did anyone notice if Madame near the bakery was wearing both her gloves? The constable blinked. I think so. I didn't. Poirot rose in a single smooth motion. But I noticed, he said, his eyes sharpened. She was twisting them, both hands. A pause, too tightly. He turned toward the doorway. And yet, here we have another. The constable's face paled slightly. You think she… I think, Poirot said, his voice calm but edged now with something colder, that in a village where nothing is misplaced. He glanced once more at the glove. Everything that is misplaced is telling us a story. And somewhere beyond the shop, faint but growing voices. Raised, uneasy. The village, it seemed, was beginning to stir, and with it something far more dangerous than fear. Because outside, someone was realizing that the dead man had not been the only one to leave something behind. The voices outside rose in uneven waves, sharp, anxious, overlapping, like the low hum of a storm gathering just beyond sight. Poirot stepped out of the back room with quiet urgency, his mind already several steps ahead of the moment. The constable followed slower, glancing once more at the glove as though it might shift on its own when left unwatched. Swallows, what is it now? The constable muttered under his breath, but Poirot had already reached the front of the shop. The crowd had grown thicker, faces pressed closer, eyes darting, and at the center of it tension, raw and uncontained. Arthur Bellamy stood rigid, his voice raised for the first time. I'm telling you I did nothing of the sort. Opposite him, Mrs. Dalrymple clutched her shawl, her lips trembling. Then why were you arguing with him, Arthur? Everyone heard you. It was nothing. Bellamy snapped, then exhaled sharply, dragging a hand across his face. Groans quietly. He was prying as usual, that's all. Poirot paused just inside the doorway, watching, listening. The woman from the bakery stood slightly apart again, but no longer still. Her hands moved in small, restless motions, one gloved, the other bare. Poirot's gaze flicked to it instantly. Ah, there it was, the smallest fracture in the illusion. He stepped forward. Madame, he said gently. She startled, visibly. Gasped softly, her bare hand twitched, then instinctively moved behind her back. You have lost something, Poirot continued. I know I haven't. A glove, he said. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spread outward through the crowd, through the silence that followed. The constable straightened behind Poirot. Now just a moment, but Poirot raised a hand again, his eyes never leaving the woman. In the back room, he said softly, there is a glove, elegant, fine, and most certainly not used for tending flowers. The woman's breathing quickened. Sharp inhale. I don't know what you're implying, do you not? Poirot's voice remained calm, almost kind. Then perhaps you will explain why you wear only one. Her lips parted, but no words came. For a moment it seemed the entire village held its breath. Then I lost it, she said quickly, too quickly. Earlier this morning, I must have dropped it somewhere. Indeed, Poirot said, a pause. Where? I don't remember. Curious, Poirot murmured. He took a small step closer. Because it appears you remember many things. You remembered to watch the ground beside the body. You remembered to hide your hand. And yet you do not remember losing something so personal. Her composure cracked just slightly. I think this is outrageous, she snapped, though her voice wavered at the edges. You can't simply accuse me. Who even are you? Poirot inclined his head. A man who listens, he said. Silence. Then softly, and who notices when silence becomes too loud. The constable cleared his throat, stepping forward at last. Madam, I'll need you to come with me, just until we sort this out. I haven't done anything, she insisted, her voice rising now, almost breaking. Sniffs sharply. You're all mad, this whole village. Perhaps, Poirot said quietly. His gaze drifted not to her but to Arthur Bellamy, who had gone very still, too still. Or perhaps, Poirot continued, we are only beginning to see clearly. Bellamy's eyes flicked toward him. What's that supposed to mean? Poirot studied him for a long moment. Then you said Monsieur Pritchard was asking questions. Yes, about deliveries, stock. Yes, and you found this irritating. Bellamy's jaw tightened. Anyone would. Poirot nodded slowly. Of course, a beat. Tell me, Monsieur Bellamy, what was delivered this morning? Bellamy hesitated, just a fraction, but enough. I don't see how that's relevant. No, Poirot's voice softened. And yet a man lies dead, poisoned, in a village where such things do not happen. He stepped closer. And you hesitate over something as simple as a delivery. Bellamy's eyes hardened. It was nothing unusual. Then say it. Another pause, the air thickened again. Fertilizer, Bellamy muttered at last. Poirot's head tilted. Ah, his gaze drifted slowly, deliberately back toward the florist's shop. To encourage growth, he said, then back to Bellamy. Or perhaps to conceal something else. Bellamy's face flushed. Now see here, but Poirot had already turned away. His attention shifting once more, back to the woman, who was trembling now not with indignation but something deeper. Fear, real fear. Madame, Poirot said softly, you touched the cup. Her eyes snapped to his. I know, you arranged it, he continued almost gently, perhaps even poured it. Her breath hitched. Whispers, I didn't, but you did not know, Poirot said, his voice dropping lower still, that you were not the only one who had reason to silence him. The words hung in the air. Heavy, dangerous, and then a sound from somewhere in the crowd, a low, uneven laugh. Chuckles softly, all heads turned. An elderly man stood near the edge, leaning on his cane, his eyes glinting with something that did not belong to grief or shock, but recognition. Well now, he said, his voice thin but steady. That's a turn, isn't it? Poirot's gaze sharpened instantly, because in that laugh there was no surprise, only confirmation, and suddenly the mystery deepened. Because if one person had poisoned the cup, and another had reason to see the man dead, then the question was no longer who killed Edwin Pritchard, but who believed they had. The laughter lingered, thin, brittle, like the echo of something that should never have been spoken aloud. All eyes settled on the old man. He did not shrink beneath the attention. If anything, he seemed almost relieved by it. His fingers tightened slightly around the head of his cane, knuckles pale, but his mouth curved faintly, as though a private joke had finally found its audience. Poirot turned toward him slowly. Vous trouvez cela amusant, monsieur? He asked, his tone mild, though his eyes were anything but. The old man gave a small shrug. Sighs through his nose, amusing, no, not quite, but familiar. He tilted his head, studying Poirot with a peculiar intensity. Very familiar. A subtle ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Who are you? The constable asked, stepping forward. Name's Horace Wimple, the old man replied. Lived here longer than most of you have been alive. He tapped his cane lightly against the stone. Tap, tap, and I've seen this before. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Before, he repeated. Wimple nodded slowly. A man asks too many questions, starts digging where he should. He glanced toward the body, now partially obscured by the constable's presence. And suddenly he doesn't wake up one morning. A murmur spread through the villagers, quieter this time, but heavier. Mrs. Dalrymple's voice trembled. That was years ago, Horace, you can't mean. Oh, I do, Wimple said softly. People forget, you see. His eyes flicked toward Poirot, but I don't. Poirot stepped closer, his interest now unmistakable. And who was this man who asked too many questions? He asked. Wimple's lips pressed together for a moment. Then Thomas Elridge. The name fell into the air like a stone into deep water. Silence followed, not confusion, recognition. Arthur Bellamy shifted his weight. Clears throat, that's got nothing to do with this. No, Poirot said quietly. Bellamy's eyes darted just briefly. It was an accident, everyone knows that. Everyone knows, Wimple echoed, his voice carrying a faint edge now, what they were told. The woman, the one with the missing glove, let out a shaky breath. Sniffs, this is ridiculous. Dredging up old stories, Poirot murmured almost to himself. He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping the faces once more. And now they were different, no longer merely curious, but guarded, closed, each one holding something back. Tell me, Poirot said softly, this Monsieur Elridge, what did he discover? No one answered, not immediately. The silence stretched. Until he didn't discover anything, Bellamy said firmly, because there was nothing to discover. Poirot looked at him and smiled just a little. Ah, he said, then it is most unfortunate that he died. Bellamy's jaw tightened again. Wimple let out a quiet breath. Huffed softly. He didn't just die. He was found at the edge of the quarry. Said he slipped. Said, Poirot repeated. Another pause. Was there an investigation? The constable shifted uncomfortably. Well, not much of one. It was ruled accidental. No reason to suspect otherwise. No reason, Poirot echoed. His gaze drifted slowly back to the florist's shop, then to the cup, then to the glove, then to the woman, who was no longer meeting anyone's eyes. Instead, she stared at the ground, her bare hand trembling faintly at her side. Madame, Poirot said gently, you prepared the tea. She flinched. I didn't. You did, he continued, his tone still calm but firmer now. Perhaps not knowing what it contained, or perhaps knowing only part of it. Her breathing grew uneven. Shaky inhale, I was asked to, a collective intake of breath. Poirot's head tilted slightly. Ah, he said, you were asked. She pressed her lips together as though trying to force the words back inside, but they had already escaped. By whom? The constable demanded. She shook her head quickly. I can't. You must, Poirot said softly, and something in his voice, quiet, unwavering, broke through her resistance. Her eyes lifted, slowly, reluctantly, and settled not on Bellamy, not on Wimple, but on Mrs. Henley, the florist. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Gasps. Mrs. Henley's face drained of color. No, that's absurd. You asked me to bring it to him, the woman said, her voice trembling now, barely holding together. You said he was waiting, that he needed to calm his nerves. I never, and you told me not to mention it to anyone, she cried, the words spilling faster now, panic rising. You said it would only make things worse if people started talking. Enough. Mrs. Henley snapped, her composure cracking at last. Voice shakes. You don't know what you're saying. Poirot watched her closely, very closely. Do you not? He said. Mrs. Henley's chest rose and fell rapidly. Her hands, once so steady, now trembled at her sides. I was trying to help him, she said, her voice suddenly quieter, strained. He was upset, agitated. He kept coming back, asking questions, accusing people. Accusing, Poirot repeated. She hesitated, just long enough. He thought someone killed Thomas Elridge, she said finally. The words settled like dust over everything, heavy, suffocating. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. And what did you think, madame? He asked. She looked at him, and for a moment, just a moment, something flickered there, not grief, not fear, but something colder. I thought, she said slowly, that he should stop digging. Silence, absolute. Poirot did not move, did not speak, because now the threads were tightening. The poisoned cup. The missing glove, the old death, the questions that should not have been asked. And beneath it all, something far older than this morning, something buried, forgotten, or meant to be. But as the wind shifted once more, carrying that bitter scent across the village, it became clear. The past was not finished with them yet. The wind dropped as suddenly as it had risen, leaving the village wrapped in a strange, suffocating stillness, as though even the air itself were listening now. No one spoke, not after that. Mrs. Henley stood near the shop doorway, her shoulders rigid, her breath shallow. The composure she had worn so carefully all morning had begun to fracture. Not completely, not yet, but enough for the truth beneath to press faintly through. Poirot watched her in silence. Then softly, you wished him to stop, he said. It was not a question. Her lips parted, but she did not answer immediately. Instead, her gaze drifted, just briefly, to the side, toward Arthur Bellamy. Poirot noticed. Of course he did. And so did someone else. Horace Wimple let out a low, knowing hum. Ah, the old man murmured, tapping his cane again. Tap, tap, there it is. Bellamy stiffened. Don't start, Wimple cut in, a faint edge sharpening his voice. This started long before today, lad. Enough, the constable snapped, though his authority felt thinner now, stretched by too many unanswered questions. One at a time. Poirot raised a hand gently. Yes, he said, one at a time, because at present we appear to have more than one truth. He turned slightly, positioning himself where he could see them all, the florist, the woman with the missing glove, Bellamy, Wimple, even Mrs. Dalrymple, who stood pale and trembling at the edge of it all. A poisoned cup, Poirot continued, his voice calm, measured, prepared in this shop, delivered by one at the request of another. He inclined his head toward the woman. You carried it, he said. Her voice came out small now. Yes. Poirot's gaze shifted to Mrs. Henley. And you instructed her. Mrs. Henley swallowed. Quiet inhale. I told her to take him tea, nothing more. And yet, Poirot said softly, the tea contained poison. Silence, a flicker of anger crossed her face. I didn't put anything in it. None, Poirot said gently. Perhaps not. He turned, slowly, deliberately. To whom did the cup belong? He asked. The question seemed simple, too simple, but it landed. Bellamy's eyes narrowed. What are you getting at? Poirot looked at him. The cup, he repeated. Was it from the shop or brought from elsewhere? A pause. Mrs. Henley hesitated. It was one of mine, from the back. Ah, Poirot nodded slightly, and before it reached Monsieur Pritchard, who touched it. No one answered, but something shifted. Bellamy's jaw clenched again, the woman's breathing quickened, and Wimple was watching them both. Carefully, Poirot stepped closer to the center of the group. Let's consider, he said quietly, a most delicate possibility. His eyes moved between them. One person prepares a cup, believing it to be harmless. A glance toward Mrs. Henley. Another delivers it, believing they are simply helping. A glance toward the trembling woman. And yet, he paused, just long enough. When the cup is drunk, it kills. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before. Which means, Poirot said, his voice dropping slightly, that's somewhere between intention and action. His gaze settled, unblinking now. Someone interfered. Bellamy exhaled sharply. Huffs, that's ridiculous. Is it? Poirot asked. Yes, you're twisting things, making it sound like what, Monsieur Bellamy? Poirot prompted gently. Bellamy stopped, because there was no safe way to finish that sentence, and they both knew it. Poirot took one step closer. You argued with the victim, he said. So what? You knew he was asking questions. So what? You knew what he was asking about. Bellamy's eyes flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. Poirot's voice softened. Thomas Elridge, the name hung between them. Bellamy looked away, and in that single motion something gave. I told him to leave it alone, Bellamy muttered. Poirot tilted his head slightly. Ah, he was stirring things up again, Bellamy continued, more forcefully now. Digging into something that was finished, done years ago. Finished, Wimple echoed under his breath. Chuckles dryly, Bellamy shot him a glare. It was an accident. You keep saying that, Poirot said quietly. Bellamy's voice tightened, because it's true. Poirot studied him, long, carefully. Then and yet, he said, you did not deny that Monsieur Pritchard knew otherwise. Bellamy said nothing. His silence spoke. Poirot's gaze drifted again, back to the shop, to the unseen cup, to the glove in the back room. Pieces, all of them pieces, but not yet aligned, not yet complete. Tell me, Poirot said softly, this morning, after your conversation with Monsieur Pritchard, where did you go? Bellamy hesitated. Too long. I went back to my shop. Directly, yes. No stops. No. Poirot's eyes narrowed just slightly. Curious, he murmured, because the scent of almonds had been strongest in the florist's shop, not the general store. And yet opportunity does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. Poirot turned once more, back toward Mrs. Henley, who now looked different, not frightened, not entirely, but cornered. You wished him silent, Poirot said again. Her lips trembled. Yes, she said. A ripple passed through the crowd, but I did not kill him. Her voice was firmer now, more certain. I only wanted him to stop asking questions. Poirot nodded slowly. And yet you gave him the means to die. Her eyes widened. Gasped softly. No, you prepared the cup, he said gently. You sent it to him. I didn't poison it. Perhaps not. Poirot's voice dropped to a near whisper. But someone knew that you would. The words slid into the silence like a blade. And suddenly the entire shape of the moment shifted. Because now this was no longer just a question of guilt, but of design, of timing, of someone who understood not only what would happen, but how it would appear. Poirot's gaze moved slowly across the gathered faces once more, measuring, weighing, listening, because somewhere here among the fear, the anger, the carefully chosen silences, was the one who had not merely acted, but planned. And as the faint scent of almonds lingered still in the air, it seemed almost certain that they were still watching. For a long moment no one moved. It was as though the entire village had become a painting, frozen mid-breath, suspended in that fragile instant where truth hovered just out of reach, waiting for the slightest pressure to break through. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. Soft inhale, not in weariness, but in concentration, because now the pattern was there, not complete, but visible. A thread running beneath everything, quiet, deliberate, patient. He opened his eyes again, and this time they went not to Mrs. Henley, nor to the trembling woman, nor even to Bellamy. They went to Horace Wimple, who was no longer smiling, but watching, very carefully. Mon cher Monsieur Wimple, Poirot said softly, you remember everything. The old man's fingers tightened on his cane. Tap, tap, pause, I do, he said. Poirot nodded. And yet you did not speak, not when Monsieur Pritchard began asking questions. Wimple shrugged faintly. Not my place. Ah, Poirot murmured, but you knew what he was finding. A pause. Wimple's eyes flickered. Just once. Poirot stepped closer. You have seen this before, he continued. A man who asks too many questions and then dies. Yes, and you recognized the pattern. Another pause. Yes. Poirot tilted his head slightly. And still you said nothing. Wimple's jaw shifted. I've lived long enough to know when silence is safer. A faint murmur stirred through the villagers. Poirot's expression softened, but only slightly. Safer for whom? He asked. Wimple did not answer, because there was no safe answer. Poirot let the silence stretch. Then you were near the shop this morning, he said. It was not a guess. It landed like fact. Wimple's grip tightened again. Wood creaks softly under pressure. I walk this street every morning. Yes, Poirot said gently, you do. He took another step, and you observe. A faint breath escaped Wimple's nose. Huffs quietly, I observe. Poirot nodded. And this morning you observed Monsieur Pritchard. Yes, and you observed the cup. A flicker there, small but undeniable. Wimple's eyes shifted just slightly toward the florist's doorway. Poirot saw it, of course he did. And you observed. Something else, Poirot continued, his voice lowering. Now the entire crowd leaned in, drawn by the quiet intensity of it. Because you knew, Poirot said, that something would happen. Wimple's lips pressed thin. I suspected, he said carefully. Ah, Poirot's voice softened again. But suspicion is not certainty. No, and yet, Poirot paused, just long enough for the weight of the next words to settle. You did not intervene. Silence. Wimple's gaze hardened slightly. It wasn't my place. Poirot studied him. Then, no, he said quietly. It was not your place to stop it. A ripple passed through the air, subtle, dangerous. Wimple's eyes narrowed. What are you implying? Poirot's gaze sharpened. That you were waiting. The words struck like flint, a spark. Wimple straightened slightly, leaning harder on his cane. Waiting for what? Poirot held his gaze. For confirmation. A breath, a shift. The village seemed to tilt, just slightly on its axis. Confirmation, Poirot repeated, that the past had not been buried as deeply as everyone believed. Wimple's mouth opened, then closed again, because he understood, and worse, he knew that Poirot understood. You said, Poirot continued, that Thomas Elridge slipped. Wimple said nothing. But you did not believe it. Still nothing. Poirot's voice dropped. You have never believed it. A long pause. Then no, Wimple said quietly. The words seemed to settle over everything like ash. Non, Poirot echoed softly, and then he turned, slowly, deliberately, back toward Arthur Bellamy, who had gone very still again, but this time it was different. This was not irritation, not frustration, but something deeper, tighter. Bellamy's voice came low. Don't look at me like that. Poirot said nothing. Bellamy's jaw clenched. I told you it was an accident. Poirot stepped closer. And yet, he said quietly, Monsieur Wimple does not believe it. That's his problem. Perhaps. Poirot's eyes did not leave his. But Monsieur Pritchard also did not believe it. Bellamy's breath hitched just slightly. Sharp inhale, and he was asking questions, Poirot continued. Yes, and he was getting closer. Bellamy's silence stretched too long. Closer to what, Monsieur Bellamy? Poirot asked softly. No answer, only the tightening of his hands, the subtle shift of weight, the kind of movement that betrays a mind racing too fast. Poirot leaned in just slightly. Closer. Truth of how Thomas Elridge died. The words dropped like a stone, and this time Bellamy flinched, not much, but enough. A collective murmur swept through the crowd. Mrs. Dalrymple covered her mouth. Gasps, the woman with the missing glove stared, wide-eyed, her fear momentarily forgotten. And Wimple did not look surprised. He looked resolved. You were the last to argue with him, Poirot said. Yes, you knew what he was asking. Yes, you knew what he was beginning to understand. Bellamy's voice came tighter now. Stop. And this morning, Poirot continued, calm, relentless, you had the opportunity. I said stop. The word cracked through the air. Sharp, raw, silence followed it instantly. Poirot did not raise his voice, did not move. He simply watched and waited, because now the truth was no longer hiding. It was pressing, straining, demanding to be spoken. And somewhere in that silence, a single, terrible realization began to take shape, because if Bellamy had reason, and Mrs. Henley had provided the means, and the woman had unknowingly delivered it, then the question was no longer just who had planned it, but who had taken the final step, and why the scent of almonds had been strongest, not when the cup was made but after. Bellamy's chest rose and fell too quickly now, each breath just a fraction too sharp, too loud in the silence that had swallowed the village whole. "No," he said again, but this time it lacked force. It came out thinner. "Frayed." Sales shakily, "No, you're twisting this." Poirot did not respond immediately. Instead, he turned his head slowly, deliberately, and looked back toward the florist's shop, toward the back room, toward the cup. "The poison," he said quietly, "was not placed where it would be obvious." A faint breeze slipped past, carrying the lingering scent once more, almonds, bitter and unmistakable. But neither, Poirot continued, was it placed where it would be hidden forever. He took a step forward, then another. Drawing closer to Bellamy, "Because whoever did this," he said, "wanted it to be found." Bellamy's eyes flickered. "That's absurd." "Is it?" Poirot's voice remained soft, almost conversational. "A poisoned drink left half-finished. A scent that lingers, a glove conveniently misplaced." He tilted his head slightly. "It is not the work of someone who wishes the truth buried." A pause. "It is the work of someone who wishes it revealed." That landed, harder than anything before. Because now the shape of the crime had changed. Not concealment, but exposure. Bellamy swallowed, cleared his throat roughly. "You're making stories." Poirot smiled faintly. "No," he said, "I am listening to the story that has already been told." His gaze shifted again, to Wimple. "And you," Poirot said, "you recognized it." Wimple did not deny it. His voice came low. "I recognized that someone was no longer afraid." "Non," Poirot murmured. "Not afraid." He turned back. "To provoke," he said, the word hung in the air. "To force the truth into the open." Mrs. Henley's breath caught. Gasps quietly. No, that's not what I—" Poirot raised a hand gently. "You wished him silent," he said. "That is true." Her eyes filled with something sharp, defensive, desperate. "He was tearing everything apart. People were talking again, whispering, digging into things that should have stayed buried." "Ah," Poirot said softly. "Buried." The word seemed to echo. Wimple shifted slightly. Bellamy's jaw tightened. The woman with the missing glove wrapped her bare hand around her wrist, as though trying to steady herself. Poirot's gaze moved between them all. "Thomas Elridge," he said, "did not simply fall." No one spoke, but no one denied it either. "And Monsieur Pritchard," Poirot continued, "began to see this." He stepped back slightly, giving space, yet somehow drawing them all closer. He asked questions. He disturbed the past. "And this," he gestured faintly toward the shop, "this morning something changed." A pause, then. "He was not meant to die quietly." The constable blinked. "What?" Poirot turned his head slightly. "The method," he said. "Poison that announces itself, a scent that betrays it, a cup left behind." He shook his head faintly. No, this was not subtle. Bellamy let out a short, strained laugh. Chuckles nervously, so now the killer wanted attention. "Yes," the word came without hesitation. Silenced him instantly. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Because silence," he said quietly, "has ruled this village for too long." The air shifted again, not with wind, but with something else. Recognition, slow, uncomfortable, unavoidable. Poirot turned once more, but this time not to Bellamy, not to Mrs. Henley, not to the trembling woman, but to the space between them, to the pattern itself. "Let us consider," he said, "a most delicate arrangement." His voice dropped, drawing them all in. "One man dies years ago, declared an accident." A glance toward Wimple, but not believed by all. A glance toward Bellamy. Another man begins to question it. A glance toward Mrs. Henley, and tension grows. A glance toward the woman. Fear spreads. He paused, then, "This morning a cup is prepared." His eyes lifted. "And before it is delivered," he let the silence stretch, long enough, heavy enough. "Someone alters it." A breath, a shift. Bellamy's fingers curled into fists. Mrs. Henley's lips trembled. The woman's eyes darted between them, and Wimple watched, still, intent. Poirot's voice softened further. "And yet the one who altered it," he tilted his head slightly, "did not remove the cup." The implications settled slowly, like fog creeping in. "They left it," Poirot said. "They allowed it to be drunk." A pause, "and they ensured it would be noticed." The constable frowned. "Why would anyone do that?" Poirot looked at him. And for the first time there was something colder in his expression. "Because," he said quietly, "sometimes justice does not come from hiding the truth." A breath. "Sometimes it comes from forcing it into the light." Silence, deep, unbroken. Then a sound, soft, unsteady, a voice. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that." All heads turned. The woman, her voice trembling, her eyes wide. "I swear." "I didn't know it would." Voice breaks. "I thought it would just make him ill, just enough to stop him, just enough to scare him." A ripple of shock tore through the crowd. Gasps, Poirot's gaze fixed on her, sharp now, focused. You placed something in the cup, he said. She shook her head frantically. Not poison, not like that. I was told it would be harmless, just something to make him stop. Told, Poirot repeated. Her breath hitched, and slowly her gaze shifted, not to Mrs. Henley. Not this time, but to Arthur Bellamy. The silence that followed was absolute. Bellamy's face went pale. No, he said immediately. No, that's a lie. You said it would just make him sick, she cried, panic spilling over now. You said it would shut him up for a while, give people time to calm things down. I never. You gave it to me, she shouted, her voice breaking completely now. Sobs, you told me to add it, just a little. You said no one would get hurt. Bellamy took a step back, then another. The crowd shifted with him, away, as though something unseen had finally taken shape. Poirot did not move, did not speak, because now the truth was no longer hidden. It was unraveling piece by piece, and what it revealed was far more dangerous than a single act of poison, because this was not just a murder. It was something older, something layered, something that had waited years to be spoken aloud. Bellamy's back met the edge of the stone wall, and for a fleeting second, just a second, he looked like a man who had nowhere left to go. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Breath trembles. She's lying, he said, but the words came out thin, stretched too tight to hold. No, the woman whispered, shaking her head violently. No, I'm not. You came to me, you said he was stirring things up again, you said it would ruin everything. Enough, Bellamy snapped, but the force had drained from him now. It did more like a plea than a command. Poirot watched him quietly, not pressing, not interrupting, because this moment, this unraveling, had its own rhythm, and to interfere would be to risk breaking it. You said, the woman continued, her voice shaking but relentless now, that if he kept digging, people would start asking about the quarry again. At that, Bellamy froze, completely. A silence fell so heavy it seemed to press against the lungs. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Ah, he murmured, the quarry. Horace Wimple exhaled slowly through his nose. Huffs, there it is. The constable frowned, looking between them. What about the quarry? But no one answered him, because now they all understood, or at least they were beginning to. Poirot took a slow step forward. Monsieur Bellamy, he said softly, years ago Thomas Elridge fell. Bellamy said nothing. He fell, Poirot continued, after asking questions. Still nothing. And this morning, Monsieur Pritchard asked the same questions. A pause. And you feared the same answers. Bellamy's hands trembled now just slightly. I didn't kill him, he said, but his voice was no longer defiant. It was tired, frayed. I told her it would make him sick, that's all. Poirot inclined his head. And the substance you gave her, where did it come from? Bellamy hesitated. Again, always that hesitation. From a delivery, he muttered. Poirot's gaze flicked briefly, just briefly, toward the idea he had already touched upon. Fertilizer, he said softly. Bellamy didn't respond, but he didn't deny it either. Poirot's voice dropped slightly. You altered it. A faint nod, almost imperceptible, but enough. The constable stepped forward sharply. You gave her poison. I didn't know it would kill him. Bellamy shot back, panic flaring again. I swear I didn't. It was just meant to silence him. Poirot finished gently. Bellamy's breath came fast. Sharp inhale, yes, but not like this, not permanently, Poirot said. Silence. Bellamy looked at him. And in that look there it was, the truth, not fully spoken, but no longer hidden. Poirot's gaze held his. And yet, he said quietly, you had already seen what happens when questions are not stopped. A flicker, pain, guilt, fear, all tangled together. The village seemed to lean closer, drawn in. Thomas Elridge, Poirot continued, did not fall by chance. Bellamy's lips parted. No, Poirot said softly. He fell because someone made sure he did. The words landed like a hammer, a sharp, collective intake of breath. Gasps, the constable stared. Are you saying, I am saying, Poirot replied calmly, that this is not the first time a man in this village has died for asking the wrong questions. Silence, heavy, unavoidable. Poirot turned his head, slowly, back to Wimple. You knew, he said. Wimple's expression did not change. I suspected, he replied, and you said nothing. Wimple's grip tightened on his cane. I've told you, yes, Poirot said quietly. You have told me. He let that settle, then you were waiting. Wimple did not deny it. This time he simply nodded, once, a small deliberate motion. I was waiting, he said. A ripple passed through the crowd. But not for this, he added, his voice low. Poirot tilted his head. Non. Wimple's eyes shifted, just slightly toward Bellamy. I was waiting for someone to say it out loud. The words seemed to settle deeper than anything before, because now this was no longer just about what had happened, but what had been hidden, what had been carried, what had been endured. Poirot's gaze returned to Bellamy. "Tell me," he said softly, "what did Monsieur Elridge discover at the quarry?" Bellamy's chest rose sharply. Breath catches, he stopped. His eyes darted to the villagers, to Wimple, to the ground, anywhere but Poirot. "I didn't mean," he started. Poirot did not interrupt, because now the truth was right there, on the edge, one push away. "He wasn't supposed to find it," Bellamy said suddenly, the words rushing out uneven. "It was already done, it was finished. I thought no one would ever—" "What did he find?" the constable pressed. Bellamy squeezed his eyes shut briefly. Groans quietly, then he found the ledger. A murmur spread instantly. "The what?" Mrs. Dalrymple whispered. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He said softly. "A record." Bellamy nodded weakly. "Shipments, deliveries, things that weren't supposed to be here, things that didn't go through proper channels." "Illegal," the constable said sharply. Bellamy swallowed. "Yes," the word dropped like lead. "And Monsieur Elridge," Poirot continued, "intended to reveal this." Bellamy's silence answered. "And so," Poirot said, his voice barely above a whisper, "he was taken to the quarry." A pause, and he fell. Bellamy's hands shook. "I didn't push him," he said quickly. "You were there," Poirot said. Bellamy froze, because that he could not deny. The silence confirmed it, and in that silence the past finally stepped fully into the present, unhidden, unforgiven. Poirot exhaled slowly. "Soft sigh, years pass," he said. "The ledger is gone." Another pause, "Or so you believed." Bellamy's eyes flickered again. Fear, fresh, immediate. Poirot saw it, and in that instant he understood, completely. He murmured, his gaze sharpened. "Mon Dieu," the words came softer now, almost to himself. Then Monsieur Pritchard, he looked up directly at Bellamy, did not merely ask questions. A pause, the air seemed to tighten again. He found it. Silence, absolute. Bellamy did not speak, did not move, but his face told everything. And Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet certainty, because now the truth was no longer emerging, it had arrived. And it was far more terrifying than anyone in Bramblewick had imagined. A low murmur swept through the crowd, rising and falling like wind through dry leaves, uneasy, disbelieving, afraid. "The ledger," Mrs. Dalrymple whispered, clutching her shawl tighter. "You mean all this time?" "Yes," Poirot said quietly. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Hidden," he continued, "but not gone." His eyes remained fixed on Bellamy. "And Monsieur Pritchard, he found it." Bellamy's lips parted, but no words came. His face had lost all color now, as though something inside him had simply drained away. "I didn't know," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Not at first. He came to me asking questions again about old shipments, about the quarry. I thought he was guessing." A pause. "But then," breath trembles, "he told me things he shouldn't have known." Poirot nodded slowly. "And so," he said, "you understood." Bellamy swallowed hard. "He said he'd go to the authorities. That he wouldn't let it stay buried like before." A faint, bitter sound escaped him. Huffs weakly, he thought he was doing the right thing. "And you?" Poirot asked gently. Bellamy looked at him. For a moment, just a moment, something like shame flickered there. "I thought," he began, then stopped. Groans quietly. "I thought everything would come apart again. The village, the business, everything tied to it." Poirot murmured. "Everything tied to it." The implication lingered. Because now it was no longer just about one man, or one crime, it was about how many had benefited from silence. Poirot's gaze drifted slowly, deliberately across the villagers, and one by one they looked away. Mrs. Dalrymple, the baker, even the constable, whose frown deepened as understanding crept in. Only Wimple held his gaze, steady, unflinching. "You all knew," Poirot said softly. No one answered, but no one denied it either. "You suspected," he corrected, "and you chose not to know." A long silence followed, heavy, then a quiet voice broke it. "I didn't know about the ledger." All heads turned. Mrs. Henley, her voice trembled, but her eyes were fixed on Poirot now. "I swear it," she said, shaky and hale. "I knew about Thomas. I knew it wasn't an accident, but I didn't know why. Not truly." Poirot studied her. "And yet," he said gently, "you still wished Monsieur Pritchard to stop." Her expression tightened. "Because he was tearing everything open again," she said, her voice rising, emotion breaking through. People were whispering, suspecting, looking at each other like strangers. "Do you know what that does to a place like this?" Poirot did not answer, because he did know. Of course he did. "And so," he said quietly, "you chose silence over truth." She looked away. "Sniffs, yes." the word barely audible. Poirot nodded once, then turned back to Bellamy. And you, he said, chose something more. Bellamy's shoulders sagged. I didn't mean to kill him, he repeated, his voice almost pleading now. I just wanted time to figure something out, to stop him from going to the police. And the substance, Poirot said, you believed it would not kill. Yes, but you did not test this belief. Bellamy said nothing, because there was no defense, only assumption and consequence. Poirot's voice softened. Recklessness, he said, not intent. The constable stepped forward again, more firmly this time. That's still enough. Bellamy didn't resist, he barely seemed to hear. I thought it would just make him ill, he murmured again, as though saying it enough times might undo what had happened. Voice cracks, I didn't know. Poirot watched him. Long, carefully. Then no, he said quietly. You did not know. A pause, but you feared. Bellamy's eyes lifted. And there it was, the truth beneath everything, fear of exposure, of consequence, of the past catching up. Poirot turned slightly, his gaze returning once more to Wimple. And you, he said, you waited. Wimple nodded slowly. I did, for justice. A pause, then for truth, Wimple said. The distinction lingered. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, he murmured, for truth. He glanced once more toward the florist's shop, toward the unseen cup, the glove, the place where it had all come together. So, Poirot said softly, we arrive at a most curious conclusion. The villagers leaned in again. Because even now, even after everything, there was something unfinished, something not yet settled. One prepares, Poirot said, one delivers, one alters. His gaze moved between them, and one waits, silence, and yet, he paused just long enough, there remains a final question. The air tightened again, because they all felt it, the last piece, the one that did not quite fit. The poison, Poirot said, was stronger than expected. A faint murmur. Bellamy frowned slightly. I told you I didn't know. Yes, Poirot said. I believe you. That seemed to surprise him. But then, Poirot continued, his voice lowering again, sharpening slightly. We must ask, he turned. Slowly, deliberately, his gaze sweeping the group once more. Why the scent was strongest in the back room. Silence, immediate, uncomfortable. The constable blinked. Because that's where the cup was. No, Poirot said softly. That is where the cup remained. A pause, but not necessarily. Where it was finished. The words landed and something shifted again, because now there was a new possibility, a new fracture in the story. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. Someone, he said, was with Monsieur Pritchard after he began to feel unwell. A breath, a ripple, and that someone, Poirot continued, had the opportunity, he let the silence stretch, to ensure that he would not recover. The implication spread slowly, like ink in water. Bellamy shook his head immediately. No, that's not true. I left. I never came back. I believe you, Poirot said again, and this time it was not reassuring. It was dangerous, because if Bellamy had not returned, then someone else had. Poirot turned, very slowly, back toward the florist's shop, and then to Mrs. Henley, who had gone very still, too still. Her hands no longer trembled, her breathing no longer uneven, just still. Poirot watched her, and in that stillness he saw it, not panic, not fear, but something far more controlled, far more deliberate. Madame, he said softly, her eyes lifted, meeting his, steady, unflinching. Yes, she said, and though her voice was calm, there was something beneath it now, something that had not been there before, something that had been hidden until this moment. Poirot tilted his head slightly. You wished him silent, he said once more. A pause. Then, yes, she replied, but this time there was no hesitation, no trembling, no denial, only acceptance. And in that single word, the entire atmosphere shifted, because suddenly it no longer felt like the truth was emerging. It felt like something far darker had just stepped forward, willingly. The stillness around Mrs. Henley was not the stillness of fear. It was the stillness of decision. Poirot did not move, but something in his expression changed, just slightly, as though a final piece had slid quietly into place. Madame, he said, his voice softer now, almost gentle, you returned to the back room. She held his gaze. Yes, a faint ripple passed through the crowd. Gasps whispered. The constable stepped forward instinctively. Now wait, just. Poirot raised a hand. Not yet, because this required precision. You found Monsieur Pritchard, Poirot continued, already affected by the poison. Yes, her voice did not waver, not this time, and he was not yet dead. A pause. The faintest shift in her breath. Inhale slowly. No, she said, the words settled heavily. Poirot nodded once, and he spoke to you. Another pause, longer this time. Yes, the crowd leaned closer, drawn by something deeper than curiosity now. This was no longer speculation. This was confession beginning to take shape. What did he say? Poirot asked. Mrs. Henley's eyes flickered, not with panic but with memory. He said he knew, she replied quietly. A murmur rippled outward. Poirot did not interrupt. He said the ledger was hidden, she continued. That he had seen it, that he had proof of what happened at the quarry. Her voice tightened just slightly. And then she stopped. For a moment it seemed she might not continue. Poirot waited, silent, unmoving, because silence when used correctly is far more powerful than pressure. He said he would tell everyone, she finished at last. Exhale softly, the words lingered. Poirot nodded. Yes, he said. That is what he would do. Mrs. Henley's lips pressed together. And you believed him? Yes, a beat. And so, Poirot said gently, you made a decision. The air seemed to tighten again. The constable shifted. Madam, you'd better be careful, but she didn't look at him. Her eyes remained on Poirot because he understood, and she knew it. I didn't plan it, she said quietly. No, no, a pause, but when I saw him, when I heard what he said, her fingers curled slightly at her sides. I knew it would all come out again. Poirot's gaze sharpened. All, he repeated. She gave the smallest nod. Everything, she said, and there it was again, that word, everything. Not just the ledger, not just the quarry, but something broader, something that touched more than one life, more than one secret. Poirot saw it, of course he did. And that, he said softly, was unacceptable. Her jaw tightened. Yes, the word came without hesitation. The crowd stirred uneasily. Because now there was no mistaking it, no softening it, no explaining it away. Poirot's voice lowered. And so, he said, you finished what had been started. Silence, absolute. Mrs. Henley did not speak immediately, but she did not deny it either. Her eyes drifted just briefly toward the shop, toward the place where the cup still sat, and then back to Poirot. I only meant to stop him, she said. A pause, then, but he wouldn't stop. The words fell like stones, heavy, irrevocable. Poirot studied her, long, carefully. You ensured, he said quietly, that he could not. She closed her eyes briefly. Soft exhale, yes. The confession settled over the village like a slow-moving shadow. The constable stepped forward at once. Madam, but again Poirot lifted his hand, because something still remained, and he felt it, clear as the scent still lingering faintly in the air. Non, Poirot said softly. Not yet, the constable blinked. What do you mean, not yet? She just admitted. Yes, Poirot said. She has admitted to the final act. A pause, not the whole. The words cut through everything. Mrs. Henley's eyes opened again, and for the first time there was something like uncertainty in them. What do you mean? She asked. Poirot's gaze held hers, steady, unrelenting. You said, he began, that you did not plan it. Yes, and I believe you. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. But, Poirot continued softly, you are not a woman who acts without awareness. Her expression tightened. I know what I did. Yes, Poirot said, but do you know everything that was done? Silence, a different kind now, uneasy, uncertain. Poirot turned slightly, his eyes moving not to Bellamy this time, not to the trembling woman, not even to Wimple, but to the back of the crowd, where someone had not spoken, not once. A man, quiet, unremarkable at first glance, the baker. Flour still faintly dusting his sleeves, standing very still, too still. Poirot's gaze settled on him and sharpened, because sometimes the most dangerous presence is the one that has said nothing at all. Mon ami, Poirot said softly, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention. The man looked up, startled. Why yes, Poirot tilted his head. You have been very quiet. A nervous chuckle. Chuckles weakly. I don't see how any of this concerns me. Non. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. Then perhaps you will explain, he paused, just long enough, why the scent of almonds, the entire crowd leaned in, was not only in the florist's shop. Silence, total. But also, Poirot finished softly, on your hands. The baker froze completely, and in that instant the mystery shifted, again, because what had seemed complete was not even close. The baker's hands twitched just slightly, but enough for Poirot, enough for everyone. Hush fell so suddenly it felt as though the entire village had inhaled and forgotten how to breathe. My hands, the baker stammered, forcing a weak laugh. Chuckles nervously, that's absurd, I've been kneading dough all morning, of course they smell of almonds. Poirot finished softly. The word landed with precision. The baker's smile faltered. Flour, he corrected quickly. Flour and sugar, and bitter almond, Poirot said. The constable stepped forward, sniffing instinctively, then hesitated. Expression shifted. Wait, A faint murmur spread. The baker's breathing quickened. Sharp inhale. This is ridiculous. You can't just— But I can, Poirot said gently. He took a step closer. Because there is something curious, mon ami, about your trade. The baker swallowed. Poirot's voice remained calm, almost conversational. You work with ingredients, with powders, with measures. A slight tilt of the head. You understand proportions. A pause, and more importantly, he let it hang. You understand the difference between harmless and deadly. The silence that followed was suffocating. The baker's eyes darted left, right, searching for something, anything to hold on to. There are many substances, Poirot continued softly, that resemble one another, that can be mistaken by those who do not know. His gaze flicked briefly, almost kindly toward Bellamy, or misunderstood. Bellamy stared back, confusion and dread beginning to mix. But you, Poirot said, returning his focus to the baker, you would not make such a mistake. The baker shook his head quickly. I don't know what you're implying. You supplied it, Poirot said, the words cut clean. No, yes, Poirot did not raise his voice, he did not need to. You provided the substance to Monsieur Bellamy, he said. Not fertilizer, not anything harmless. A pause, but something far more precise. The baker's face drained. I didn't— You knew what he intended, Poirot continued. Or at the very least you knew it would not end well. The baker's lips trembled. Voice falters. He said it was just to scare him, just to make him ill. And you believed this? Poirot asked. The question hung heavy. The baker hesitated. Too long. I swallows hard. I didn't ask. Ah, Poirot murmured. No questions. The irony did not go unnoticed. A faint, bitter ripple passed through the crowd. Just like before, Wimple said quietly. All heads turned. The baker flinched. I had nothing to do with the quarry, he snapped too quickly. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Non, he said softly, but you knew of it. The baker's silence confirmed it, and when Monsieur Pritchard began asking questions, Poirot took another step forward. You recognized the danger. The baker's voice dropped to a whisper. Whispers, it was all going to come out. Yes, Poirot said, and that frightened you. A pause. The baker nodded faintly. Yes, the word barely audible. Poirot inclined his head. And so you helped. I didn't think, the baker started, then broke off, running a trembling hand through his hair. Groaned softly. I didn't think it would go this far. No, Poirot said quietly. You did not think. Silence. The constable stepped forward again, more certain now. You knowingly provided poison. The baker shook his head weakly. I didn't know how much. He asked for something mild, something to make him sick. You measured it, Poirot said. The baker stopped, because that he could not deny. You measured it, Poirot repeated softly, and you chose the amount, a breath, a long, trembling breath. Voice cracks, I may have misjudged. Non, Poirot said gently. You did not misjudge. The baker looked up, and for the first time there was real fear in his eyes. Poirot held his gaze. You ensured, he said quietly, that it would be enough. The words settled like ice. The baker staggered back a step. Stumbles, no, I didn't. You knew, Poirot continued, that if Monsieur Pritchard merely fell ill he would recover. A pause, and then he would speak. The truth of it hung there, unavoidable. And you, Poirot said softly, could not allow that. The baker's shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of him. I couldn't, he whispered. Silence, total. I couldn't let it happen again, he said, his voice breaking now. Sniffs, breath uneven. The village barely survived the last time. The whispers, the suspicion, people turning on each other. And so, Poirot said, you chose to prevent it. A faint nod. Yes. The constable moved in, placing a firm hand on the baker's arm, but Poirot still did not step back, because now everything was visible, clear, each piece in its place. One man feared exposure, he said, glancing briefly at Bellamy. One woman feared upheaval, his gaze shifting to Mrs. Henley. One acted without understanding, a brief look toward the trembling woman. And one, he returned his focus to the baker, ensured the outcome. The baker closed his eyes. Soft exhale, yes. The word came without resistance. The village stood in stunned silence, because this was not a single act, not a single hand, but a chain, each link connected, each choice building upon the last. Poirot finally stepped back, slowly. Deliberately, the dead do not forget, he said quietly. The words seemed to echo faintly through the still air. And today, a pause. They have been remembered. No one spoke, no one moved. The scent of almonds had begun to fade now, carried away at last by a shifting breeze. But what it had revealed, what it had unearthed, remained, heavy, unsettling, unfinished. because even now, as the constable began to gather those responsible, as the villagers stood in shaken silence, as the truth of the past settled uneasily into the present, there was one thing Poirot had not yet said, one thread still loose, one detail small, precise, and deeply troubling. His gaze drifted once more back toward the florist's shop, toward the cup, toward the place where it had all begun, and as his eyes narrowed ever so slightly, a quiet realization surfaced. Soft, cold, and far from resolved, Poirot did not follow the constable as he began to lead Bellamy and the baker away. He did not watch Mrs. Henley as she stood there, rigid and pale, nor the trembling woman who had collapsed onto a nearby bench, her quiet sobs breaking the silence in uneven waves. Sniffs, breath shuddering no, his attention had already drifted elsewhere, back to the shop, back to the cup, because something small refused to settle. He moved without haste, slipping once more through the doorway as the bell gave a faint, tired ring. Ding! Inside, the air felt different now, not heavier, but clearer, as though the truth once spoken had stripped something away, and yet the scent lingered, faint, stubborn. Poirot stepped into the back room again, his movements slow, deliberate. The cup still sat where it had been left, half full, untouched since. He approached it quietly as though it might react to his presence. Curious, he murmured. His gloved fingers hovered over the rim, then gently lifted it once more. He tilted it slightly, watching the liquid shift. There, a detail, so small it would have escaped most eyes, but not his. A faint residue clinging to the inner edge, not evenly distributed, not dissolved fully. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Ah, he set the cup down again, more carefully this time, then turned his gaze to the table, to the space around it, to the chair, still slightly askew, as though someone had risen quickly or been helped. Poirot tilted his head. "Non," he whispered. "Not helped." A faint sound escaped him. Soft exhale, because now it aligned. He stepped back slightly, his eyes scanning the room once more. The bucket, the glove, the slow drip of water. Drip, drip, everything in its place, and yet one thing wrong, one thing that did not belong. Poirot's gaze returned to the cup. To finish the drink, he said softly, almost to himself, one must lift it. He mimed the motion slightly. A simple act, a pause, but a man already weakened, his eyes flicked to the chair, would not rise so abruptly. The realization settled, cold. Precise. Poirot straightened slowly, because this was the final fracture, the one that changed everything. He turned and stepped back into the front of the shop. The village still lingered outside, quieter now, subdued. The constable had not yet left, his attention divided, his mind clearly racing. "Officer," Poirot called gently. The man turned. "Yes." Poirot stepped forward. "There is one more matter." A ripple of unease passed through those who remained. Mrs. Henley looked up. Bellamy froze mid-step. Even the baker, held firmly by the constable's grip, lifted his head slightly, because something in Poirot's voice had changed. Not louder, not sharper, but deeper, final. Poirot's gaze moved between them. "One detail," he said, "remains unresolved." The constable frowned. "What do you mean? We've got confessions." "Yes," Poirot said softly. "To intent, a pause, to fear, another, to action." He let the words settle. "But not," he continued, his eyes narrowing slightly, "to sequence." Silence. The villagers leaned in again, drawn back despite themselves. "Explain," the constable said. Poirot inclined his head. "With pleasure." He turned slightly, gesturing faintly toward the shop. "The poison was placed in the cup," he said, a glance toward the baker, "and it was sufficient to kill." The baker lowered his gaze. Breath shaky, however, Poirot continued. "When Monsieur Pritchard consumed it, he did not die immediately." A pause. "He became ill." He turned his head, looking directly at Mrs. Henley. "And you found him in that state?" Her lips parted slightly. "Yes," she said. Poirot nodded. "And you spoke with him?" "Yes." "And then," he stepped closer, "you ensured that he would not recover?" A flicker of tension crossed her face. "Yes." The word came, but quieter now, less certain. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Tell me, madame." He paused, just long enough. "How?" The question hung. Simple, precise, deadly. Mrs. Henley blinked. I don't understand." Poirot held her gaze. "Yes," he said softly, "you do." A breath, the faintest tremor returned to her hands. I just left him," she said. "I didn't do anything else." "Non," Poirot said gently. "You did." The silence tightened, because now they all felt it, the shift, the mistake. "You said," Poirot continued, "that he would not stop." A pause, that he was still speaking. Her eyes flickered. "Yes, and yet." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "When I found him," the air seemed to still. He had not moved. A ripple passed through the crowd. The constable frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Poirot did not look at him. He lay where he fell, he said. A pause. No signs of struggle, no attempt to rise. His eyes returned to Mrs. Henley. And yet a man who is still speaking, still conscious, another pause, would not simply collapse without movement. The silence deepened. Mrs. Henley's breath caught. Sharp inhale, Poirot took one final step closer. Unless, he said softly, he was made unable to. The words landed like a blade. Her composure cracked, not fully, but enough. I didn't. You touched him, Poirot said. She shook her head quickly. No, you held him, he continued. No, and you ensured. His voice dropped to a near whisper that he could not call out. The truth hit hard. Her face drained completely now, because there was no more space to hide. No more room for denial. Voice trembles, her words faltered, then broke. I only held him still. The confession fell into the silence, heavy, final. A gasp rippled through the villagers. Gasps. The constable stiffened. You what? He was trying to get up, she said quickly, her voice unraveling now, panic spilling through. He was going to leave. He was going to tell everyone. I just stopped him. You restrained him, Poirot said quietly. Her breath shook. Sobs quietly, yes, and in doing so, Poirot's voice remained steady. You hastened his death. Silence, absolute, because now it was complete, not just poison, not just intent, but action, final, irreversible. Mrs. Henley collapsed slightly where she stood, her strength giving way at last. Weep softly, I didn't mean, but the words no longer mattered. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. Soft exhale, then opened them again, calm, measured, certain. Dead do not forget, he said quietly. And today, a pause, they have been heard. The wind moved again through Bramblewick, soft, carrying away the last trace of almonds, but leaving behind something far heavier, truth, and the quiet, unsettling realization that it had never truly been buried at all. The constable's grip tightened first on the baker, then on Bellamy, before he gestured sharply to one of the men lingering at the edge of the crowd. Fetch the carriage, he muttered, voice low but firm. And send word ahead. This is bigger than we thought. No one argued. No one protested, because there was nothing left to protect. Mrs. Henley remained where she had collapsed, her quiet sobs now the only sound breaking the stillness. Weep softly, the woman with the missing glove had turned away entirely, her shoulders shaking, unable or unwilling to witness what her small part had helped create. And still Poirot did not move. Stood there, his gaze drifting once more, not over the people this time, but over the space itself. The village, the street, the subtle lines that connected everything, because something still pressed at the edge of his thoughts. Unfinished, he turned slightly. Tell me, Monsieur Wimple, he said. The old man looked up, slower now, as though the weight of the years had suddenly settled more heavily upon him. Yes, Poirot's eyes were sharp again. When Monsieur Pritchard came to you, Wimple frowned faintly. Came to me, yes, and he spoke of the ledger. A pause. Yes, Poirot tilted his head. And he told you where it was. The air shifted, subtly, dangerously. Wimple did not answer immediately. Instead, he adjusted his grip on the cane. Tap, pause. Why would you think that? He asked. Poirot smiled faintly. Because, he said softly, Monsieur Pritchard was not careless. A pause. He would not speak of such a thing without securing it first. The silence deepened. Wimple's eyes narrowed slightly. And yet, Poirot continued, when we searched his person there was nothing. The constable glanced up. We didn't get that far, but I did, Poirot said gently, a flicker of surprise, then understanding, slowly dawning. He did not carry it, Poirot said. He hid it, a breath, and before he died, Poirot's gaze fixed on Wimple. He told someone where. The words settled like a quiet accusation. Wimple's face remained composed, too composed. I don't see what that has to do with anything, he said. Poirot stepped closer. It has everything to do with everything. A pause, because the ledger, Poirot said softly, still exists. A ripple passed through the remaining villagers, fear again, fresh, immediate. Bellamy's head snapped up. What? The baker stared. Whispers, no, that's not possible. Mrs. Henley looked up from where she knelt, her expression pale, hollow. He told me nothing. No, Poirot said gently. He did not. Hayes did not leave Wimple, but he told you. Silence, absolute. Wimple's grip tightened just slightly, then a faint breath escaped him. Sighs quietly, he came to me, Wimple said at last. No one moved. He said if anything happened to him, the truth should not die with him. Poirot nodded slowly. Wimple's eyes drifted not to Poirot but to the distance, toward the edge of the village, toward the hills beyond. He hid it, Wimple continued. Not in the quarry, no, too obvious. A pause, he said it was somewhere no one would think to look any more. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. And you know where this is? Wimple did not answer, but he did not need to, because his silence was confirmation. The constable stepped forward again, urgency creeping into his tone. If that ledger's real, it's evidence, we need it now. Wimple let out a dry, tired sound. Chuckles faintly, evidence, he repeated. Then he looked at Poirot. And what will you do with it? The question hung. Not hostile, but heavy. Poirot met his gaze. Truth, he said simply. Wimple studied him. Long, then slowly he nodded. Good, he said, a pause, because that's all that's left. The wind stirred again, brushing faintly through the village, carrying with it the distant scent of earth and stone. Wimple shifted his cane slightly, then turned. Come, he said, not loudly, but clearly, to the place where no one looks any more. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Because even now, even after everything, there was more buried, more waiting. Poirot followed without hesitation. Because he already knew this was not an ending, it was something else, something deeper. As they began to move past the florist's shop, past the silent bakery, past the watching eyes of a village that no longer felt quite so small, the path led outward, toward the hills, toward the quarry, and beyond it to a place that had been forgotten, or perhaps deliberately ignored. Wimple walked slowly, each step measured. Tap, 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 and as Poirot walked beside him, his gaze thoughtful, precise, one final question lingered. Not about who, not about how, but why now? Why, after all these years, had the dead chosen this moment to be remembered? The path beyond Bramblewick narrowed quickly, the neat edges of the village giving way to uneven ground and low, whispering grasses that brushed against their legs as they walked. The air felt cooler here, thinner somehow, as though the land itself had been holding its breath for years. No one spoke for a while. Only the steady rhythm of Wimple's cane marked their progress. Tap, tap, tap. Poirot walked beside him, hands folded lightly behind his back, his gaze not fixed on the path but on the man. Why now? Poirot asked at last, quietly. Wimple did not stop, but his pace slowed. Because, he said after a moment, he came too close. Poirot tilted his head slightly. Monsieur Pritchard. Yes. A pause. He didn't just find the ledger, Wimple continued. He understood it. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of damp stone. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Understood, he repeated. Wimple nodded. There are things written plainly and things written between the lines. A faint breath. Huffed softly, he saw both. Poirot said nothing, because that was the kind of detail that changed everything. And what did he see? Between the lines? Poirot asked. Wimple stopped walking, just for a moment, then turned slightly, looking back toward the village. It wasn't just Bellamy, he said. The words fell quietly, but they carried weight. Poirot's gaze narrowed almost imperceptibly. Non, he said softly. I suspected as much. Wimple gave a faint, tired smile. Chuckles under his breath. Of course you did. They resumed walking. The quarry came into view now, a jagged scar in the earth, its edges worn but not softened by time. Shadows clung to its depths, even in daylight, but Wimple did not lead them there. Instead, he veered off the path, toward a small, overgrown chapel, half forgotten. Stone cracked with age, its wooden door hanging slightly ajar. Poirot's eyes lifted. Ah, he murmured, a place of silence. Wimple nodded. No one comes here any more. They approached slowly. The grass grew thicker here, untended, whispering underfoot. The chapel door creaked as Wimple pushed it open. Creak. Inside, the air was cool and stale, carrying the faint scent of dust and something older, something preserved. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, cutting thin lines through the dimness. Wimple stepped inside. Poirot followed, and there at the far end of the room, a loose stone in the floor. Wimple tapped it lightly with his cane. Tap, then crouched slowly with effort and pried it up. Beneath it, a wrapped bundle, cloth worn but intact. He lifted it carefully, held it for a moment, then handed it to Poirot. This, Wimple said quietly, is what he found. Poirot took it with deliberate care, unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a ledger, thick, weathered but preserved. His fingers turned the first page. Columns of numbers, names, dates, shipments, and then annotations, small, precise, added later. Poirot's eyes moved across them, faster now, sharper, and then he stopped. Just briefly. Ah, Wimple watched him. You see it, he said. Poirot did not answer immediately, because yes, he saw it, clear as day, clearer than anything else. This is not merely a record of goods, Poirot said softly. No, Wimple replied. It is a record of agreements. A pause of silence. Poirot turned another page, then another, each one tightening the pattern, expanding it, revealing more, and then he stopped again, this time longer, his gaze fixed. Because there, written in a careful, deliberate hand, was a name, one that had not been spoken, not once, until now. Poirot's breath slowed. Quiet inhale, mon Dieu, Wimple's voice came low. You didn't expect that, did you? Poirot looked up, slowly, and for the first time there was something like genuine surprise in his eyes. No, he said, quiet, measured, I did not. A silence filled the chapel, thick, unsettling, because whatever Poirot had just seen, it changed things, again. Not in a small way. Wimple studied him. Well, he asked. Poirot closed the ledger gently, but his mind was racing now, reconstructing, reframing, everything. Tell me, Wimple said, his voice tightening slightly, what did he find that frightened him so much? Poirot looked at him. And this time he did not answer immediately, because this truth was not just dangerous, it was devastating. His gaze drifted past Wimple to the doorway, to the faint light beyond. To the village waiting, because the name in that ledger was not from the past. It was not buried, it was not forgotten. It was still there, still living, still watching. And as Poirot's eyes darkened slightly with understanding, one final, chilling realization settled into place. The dead had not only been remembered, they had been protecting something. The silence inside the chapel thickened, pressing in from all sides as though the very walls had begun to listen. Poirot did not move. The ledger remained in his hands, closed now, but no less powerful for it. Wimple watched him carefully, his eyes narrowing just slightly. Well, he asked again, quieter this time. Poirot lifted his gaze, slowly, measured. You said, he began, that Monsieur Pritchard understood what was written and what was not. Wimple nodded. Yes. Poirot inclined his head faintly. And you were correct. A pause, but there is more. The words settled like dust in the still air. Wimple's grip tightened on his cane. Tap, pause, more, he repeated. Poirot stepped forward just enough for the faint light from the doorway to fall across his face. This ledger, he said, records shipments, transactions, agreements, as you say. A slight tilt of the head, but it also records protection. Wimple frowned. I don't follow. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Certain names appear repeatedly, he said. Not as suppliers, not as recipients. A pause, but as constants. The word lingered. Wimple's expression shifted just slightly. People who ensured, Poirot continued softly, that questions were not asked. A faint breath escaped Wimple. Huffs quietly. Yes, he said, that's what it was. Poirot nodded. Oui. He took a small step closer. And among those names, he paused, just long enough. There is one that does not belong to the past. Wimple's eyes flickered. Who? He asked. Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned and began walking back toward the doorway. Back toward the light, because this truth did not belong in shadow, it belonged where it could be seen. Wimple followed, slower, his cane tapping again against the stone floor. Tap, tap, they stepped outside. The village lay in the distance, quiet, waiting. The others had not followed this far, but they would, they always did. Poirot stopped just beyond the chapel steps. He turned, not to Wimple, but toward the path, toward where someone now approached. A figure. Moving slowly, deliberately, as though drawn, or perhaps as though they had always intended to come. Wimple noticed it too, his brow furrowed. Who is that? He muttered. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Someone, he said softly, who has just realized, a pause, that the past is no longer silent. The figure came closer, step by step, until the light revealed the constable, but something about him was different now, not hurried, not uncertain, but composed. Too composed. Poirot watched him very carefully. Ah, he murmured. Wimple glanced at him. What is it? Poirot did not look away. The ledger, he said quietly. Wimple frowned. What about it? Poirot's voice dropped. The name. The constable reached them, stopped a few paces away. His gaze flicked briefly to the ledger in Poirot's hands, then back to Poirot. A small smile touched his lips, barely there. Well, he said evenly, that didn't take long. The air shifted. Wimple straightened slightly. Tap stops. What do you mean? But Poirot already knew. Of course he did, because now everything aligned. The access, the authority, the ability to guide the investigation, to steer it, to contain it. Poirot tilted his head slightly. Mon ami, he said softly, you have been most helpful. The constable's smile lingered. I try. A pause. And now, he added, his tone almost casual, I think it would be best if you handed that over. His eyes flicked to the ledger again. Wimple's grip on his cane tightened. Wood creaked softly. Poirot did not move. Best, he repeated. For whom? The constable's expression did not change. For everyone. A faint breeze stirred, but this time it carried no scent, only tension, thick, unforgiving. Poirot's gaze held his. And you, he said quietly, have ensured that for many years. The constable inclined his head slightly. I've done what was necessary. A pause, to keep things stable. Wimple let out a low, disbelieving breath. Huffs, you, he said. You were just a boy when— Yes, the constable said, but I learned. The words were calm, too calm. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And Thomas Elridge, he said softly, he learned too much. The constable's smile faded just slightly. Yes, the admission came without resistance. And so, Poirot continued, he was removed. A pause, and the ledger hidden. Another, and the silence maintained. The constable said nothing, because there was nothing to deny. Poirot's voice dropped further. And when Monsieur Pritchard found it, the constable's gaze flicked again, quick, sharp. Everything became fragile. A breath, and so, Poirot said, you allowed others to act. The constable's lips curved faintly again. They were already inclined. We, Poirot said softly, you merely ensured the outcome. Silence, the truth stood between them now, clear, cold, complete. Wimple's voice came low. You let them take the blame. The constable shrugged slightly. They played their parts. Poirot's gaze did not waver. And yours? He asked. A pause, the faintest shift in the constable's posture. My part, he said, was to make sure this. He nodded toward the ledger. Never saw daylight again. A long silence followed, because now the final layer had been revealed. Not just fear, not just guilt, but control, deliberate, sustained. Poirot exhaled slowly. Soft breath, mon Dieu. He looked down at the ledger, then back up. And yet, he said quietly, here we are. Constable's expression hardened slightly. Yes, he said, here we are. A pause. And I suggest, he added, his voice lowering just enough to carry weight, we resolve this quickly. The implication was clear, unmistakable. Wimple shifted beside Poirot, uneasy now, because this was no longer just truth. This was danger. Immediate, real. Poirot did not move, did not retreat. Instead, he stepped forward, just slightly, and smiled, faintly. Non, he said, quiet, certain, I think. A pause. We have only just begun. The constable's smile did not return, but something colder took its place. A stillness not of patience but of calculation. You're a perceptive man, he said quietly, his eyes never leaving Poirot. That can be inconvenient. Poirot inclined his head almost politely. And yet, here I am. The wind stirred faintly across the hillside, brushing through the tall grass with a dry whisper. Shhhh. Wimple shifted beside him, the tip of his cane pressing harder into the ground now. Tap stops. You won't walk away from this, Wimple said, his voice low but steady. The constable didn't even look at him. No, he said, I don't expect to. A pause, then his hand moved, not quickly, not dramatically, but with quiet certainty, toward the inside of his coat. Wimple sucked in a breath. Sharp inhale. Poirot did not move, not yet, because movement at the wrong moment could be fatal. Instead he spoke, calm, measured. Tell me, Poirot said softly, how long have you known? The constable's hand paused just slightly. A fraction. Known what? He asked. Poirot's eyes sharpened. That the ledger would resurface. A beat. The constable exhaled slowly. Breath through nose. I didn't know, he said, but I suspected. Ah, Poirot murmured. Suspicion. A faint tilt of the head. Much like Monsieur Wimple. Wimple let out a dry sound. Huffs quietly. Difference is, he muttered, I didn't plan for it. The constable's lips curved faintly. No, he said, you just waited. And you? Poirot asked. The constable's gaze returned fully to him. I prepared. The word landed, clean, final. Poirot nodded slowly. Of course you did. A pause, because men like you do not leave things to chance. The constable's hand slipped fully inside his coat now, but still he did not draw anything. Not yet. Hand me the ledger, he said. His voice was no longer casual. It was controlled. Weighted, an order, not a request. Poirot held the ledger loosely in one hand, almost carelessly. You see, Poirot said softly, this is where you make your error. A flicker, small but real. The constable's eyes narrowed. Oh, yes. Poirot took a step not backward but slightly to the side. Subtle, measured. You believe this moment is about possession, he continued. A pause. The ledger in my hand versus the silence you have maintained. The constable said nothing, but his posture shifted, ever so slightly, listening now, because something in Poirot's tone had changed. And yet, Poirot said, you misunderstand the nature of truth. The wind picked up again, stronger this time, pulling at their coats, stirring the dry grass into restless motion. "Shhhhhhh." Wimple glanced between them, his breath tight. "Quiet, inhale." The constable's voice came low. "I don't misunderstand anything." Poirot smiled faintly. "Non." He lifted the ledger slightly. "Then allow me to clarify." A pause. "You see, this," he tapped the cover lightly, "is no longer your greatest problem." The constable's eyes flicked to it, just for a second. "And why is that?" he asked. Poirot's smile widened just slightly. "Because you're too late." The words struck, sharp, immediate. The constable's hand froze inside his coat. "What do you mean?" he said, and now there it was, the first crack. Poirot's voice remained calm, even gentle. "I mean," he said, "that before we left the village." A pause. "I took certain precautions." Wimple blinked, glancing at him. "You what?" Poirot did not look at him. His eyes remained locked on the constable. "I am not," he said softly, "a man who walks into danger without preparation." The constable's gaze hardened. "What did you do?" Poirot tilted his head slightly. "I ensured," he said, "that what is written here," he lifted the ledger again, "would not remain here." Silence. The wind seemed to drop all at once. The constable's expression changed. Subtly, dangerously. "You're bluffing," he said. Poirot said nothing, just watched him, and that was enough, because doubt is a powerful thing. "What did you do?" the constable repeated, sharper now. Poirot's voice dropped. "I shared it." A breath. "With whom?" the constable demanded. Poirot's smile faded, not into fear, but into something far more serious. "Those," he said quietly, "who will not ignore it." The words settled like iron. The constable's hand slowly withdrew from his coat. Empty but tense, calculating. "You're lying," he said again, but now there was strain beneath it. Poirot took one final step forward, closing the distance, not aggressively but deliberately. "No," he said, "I am insuring." A long silence followed, because now the balance had shifted, not fully, not safely, but enough. The constable exhaled slowly. Breath steadying, his eyes moved, briefly, to Wimple. "Back to Poirot. You've made this very complicated," he said. Poirot inclined his head. "Non," he replied. "I have made it visible." A pause, and once something is visible, his gaze sharpened. It can no longer be buried. The wind rose again, stronger now, rushing through the grass, rattling the loose stones of the chapel behind them. Rattle shhhh. For a moment no one moved, no one spoke, and then the constable smiled again. But this time it was different, not calm. Not controlled, but edged. "You really believe that?" he said softly. Poirot held his gaze. "Yes." A pause. The constable tilted his head slightly, studying him. Then very slowly he stepped back, one step, then another, creating distance, not retreat but repositioning. "Then I suppose," he said, his voice low, almost thoughtful, "we'll see who reaches them first." The words lingered, dark, threatening. Wimple stiffened. Tap resumes, uneven. Poirot did not move, but his eyes followed. Because now this was no longer just about what had been uncovered. It was about what would happen next. And as the constable turned, beginning to move down the path, back toward the village, the tension did not break. It deepened, because somewhere beyond sight, beyond sound, the truth was already moving. And whether it would arrive in time remained uncertain. The moment the constable turned, the air seemed to fracture, quietly, invisibly, but unmistakably. Poirot did not call after him. Did not attempt to stop him, because pursuit at this moment would not serve the truth. It would only scatter it. Instead, he stood still, watching as the constable's figure receded down the narrow path, his pace measured but purposeful, his silhouette cutting sharply against the pale stretch of grass and stone. Wimple shifted beside him. "Tap, tap, uneven. You're letting him go?" the old man asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Poirot did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the retreating figure. "Non," he said at last softly. "I am allowing him to reveal himself." Wimple frowned. "He's already done that." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "To us," he said. A pause, but not yet to the world. The wind rose again, tugging at their coats, carrying with it the distant murmur of the village below, voices, movement, something stirring. Wimple exhaled slowly. "Sighs, and you think your precautions will be enough?" he asked. Poirot's lips curved faintly. "I do not rely on enough," he said. "I rely on inevitability." The word hung between them. Wimple glanced down the path again. "He'll go for it," he muttered. "The ledger, whatever copies you made, he'll try to get ahead of it." "Yes," Poirot said, "and that is precisely what we require." Wimple blinked. "Require?" Poirot finally turned, his eyes sharp again. "Because a man who believes he still has control," he said, "will act." a pause, and when he acts. His gaze darkened slightly. He exposes everything. The realization settled slowly. Wimple's grip tightened on his cane. Tap stops, you're using him. Poirot inclined his head. I am allowing him to choose. A faint, dry chuckle escaped Wimple. Chuckles quietly, same thing, he muttered. Poirot did not disagree. Instead, he turned back toward the chapel, toward the open doorway, toward the place where the ledger had been hidden for years, and now no longer was. Come, Poirot said quietly. Wimple hesitated. Where? Poirot stepped forward. Back. A pause. To where this began. Wimple frowned. The village. Yes. Another pause, and perhaps, Poirot added softly, just a little further. The path down felt different now, not lighter, but sharper. Every step carried weight. The village came into view again, but it no longer looked the same. The neat cottages, the tidy shop fronts, the familiar quiet, all of it changed, because now beneath it all the truth had been seen. And once seen, it could not be unseen. As they approached, movement became clearer. The constable had returned ahead of them, and something was already happening. Voices, raised, urgent, a small crowd forming near the square. Wimple slowed. Tap, tap, that's not good, he murmured. Poirot's eyes narrowed. No, he said softly, it is not. They moved closer, and then the scene revealed itself. The constable stood at the center, speaking sharply to two men, villagers, his tone controlled but edged. Check the post, he was saying. Anything sent out this morning, letters, parcels, everything. The men nodded quickly, hurrying off. Poirot stopped just short of the crowd. A faint smile touched his lips. Ah, he murmured. Wimple glanced at him. What? Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. He is searching, he said, a pause, for something that is no longer there. Wimple blinked. You actually sent it. Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he stepped forward. The crowd parted slightly, murmurs rippling as he passed. The constable saw him immediately, and this time there was no smile, only tension, sharp, visible. You've caused quite a stir, the constable said. Poirot inclined his head politely. Truth often does. A pause, the constable stepped closer, lowering his voice. Where is it? He asked. Poirot met his gaze. Where it needs to be. The constable's jaw tightened. That's not an answer. No, Poirot agreed softly. It is a conclusion. A flicker of irritation crossed the man's face. You think this is over, he said. Poirot tilted his head slightly. Do you? The question hung dangerous, because the answer was no longer simple. The constable exhaled slowly. Breath controlled. You've made this public, he said. Messy. Poirot's gaze remained steady. Visible, he corrected. A pause, and now, his voice dropped slightly. It cannot be undone. The constable's eyes flicked briefly to the villagers, to the watching faces, to the shifting tension, and in that moment, for the first time, he understood. Not just what had been uncovered, but what had changed. The silence, the quiet complicity, the unspoken agreements, gone, replaced by something far more dangerous, awareness. He looked back at Poirot, and something in his expression hardened. You've started something, he said. Poirot did not deny it. Yes, a long pause. The constable nodded slowly, then very quietly, then let's see how far it goes. The words were not a threat, not exactly, but they carried weight, because now this was no longer contained. No longer hidden, the truth had begun to move, through the village, through its people, through its past, and as Poirot stood there calm, composed, watching it unfold, one thing became unmistakably clear. This was no longer just a mystery, it was a reckoning, and it had only just begun. The murmur in the square did not fade. It grew, not loudly, not chaotically, but steadily, like something long buried finally finding air. Villagers began speaking to one another in low, urgent tones. Names were whispered. Old memories stirred. Eyes that once avoided each other now met, searching, questioning. The constable stood at the center of it, but the control he once held had begun to slip. Not dramatically, but undeniably. Poirot watched, quiet, still. Because this was the moment he had been waiting for. Wimple leaned closer, his voice low. You've cracked it open, he muttered. Huff softly, there's no closing it now. Poirot's gaze drifted across the faces. None, he said, and that is precisely why it must remain open. A pause. Truth, he added softly, does not survive if it is allowed to settle again. The constable turned sharply, his voice cutting through the rising murmur. Enough, he barked. The square quieted briefly. Old habits. Old authority still lingering, but not as strong as before. Everyone return to your homes, he continued, his tone firm. There will be an official inquiry. Until then I suggest, Wimple cut in, stepping forward, his cane striking the stone with a sharper sound than before. Tap, a ripple moved through the crowd. The constable's eyes narrowed. Careful, Wimple did not back down. No, he said, you've had years of suggestions. A murmur of agreement rose, soft but present. Poirot did not intervene, he simply observed, because now the village itself was speaking, and that mattered more than anything he could say. The constable's jaw tightened. You don't understand what you're doing, he said. Wimple let out a dry laugh. Chuckles, oh, I understand it better than you think. A pause, and so do they. He gestured faintly to the crowd. Faces uncertain, yes, but no longer passive, no longer silent. The constable looked around. And for the first time there was something like calculation shifting into concern, because control, once questioned, is difficult to reclaim. Poirot stepped forward then, not forcefully, but with quiet intention. Mon ami, he said softly. The constable's gaze snapped back to him. You fear chaos, Poirot continued. A pause, but what you truly fear, his eyes sharpened, is accountability. The word struck, clean. The constable's expression hardened. You think this ends with me, he said. Poirot tilted his head. Non, he replied. I know that it does not. A faint breeze passed through the square, lifting the edges of coats, stirring the dust along the cobblestones. Because the ledger, Poirot said, is not merely a record of what was done. A pause. It is a map. The constable's eyes flickered, just briefly. A map, Poirot repeated, of everyone who chose silence over truth. The crowd shifted uneasily, because now this was no longer about a single man, or even a single crime. It was about them, all of them. You've turned them against each other, the constable said, his voice low. Poirot shook his head slightly. Non, he said, I have allowed them to see. A long silence followed, then a voice from the back, quiet, unsteady. I remember Thomas. Heads turned, a woman stepped forward, older, her hands clasped tightly together. Breath shaky, he came to me, she said. Before he died, he said something wasn't right. A murmur spread. Another voice followed. He came to me too, then another, and me. The pattern emerged, slowly, but unmistakably. The constable's control fractured further. Enough of this, he snapped, but it was already too late, because now the past was not just being revealed, it was being remembered, together, collectively, and that was something no single person could contain. Poirot watched the shift with quiet focus, because this was the final movement, not of deduction, but of consequence. The constable stepped back slightly, not retreating, but reassessing. His gaze moved across the crowd, measuring, calculating, and then slowly it returned to Poirot. You've changed the balance, he said. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, a pause, and now the question hung, not just for Poirot, but for everyone, because now there was no clear path forward, only choices, uncertain, uncomfortable, necessary. Poirot's gaze softened slightly, but his voice remained steady. Now, he said quietly, we continue. The simplicity of it carried weight, because there was no neat resolution, no tidy conclusion, only movement, forward, into truth, into consequence, into whatever came next. The constable studied him. Long, then a faint, almost imperceptible shift, not surrender, not acceptance, but something closer. Very well, he said, a pause, then let it continue. The words settled into the square, heavy, unfinished. As the murmurs rose again, stronger now, more certain, Poirot stood quietly among them. Listening, watching, because even now, even after everything, there were still questions, still layers, still truths waiting beneath the surface. And somewhere within it all something else stirred, something not yet revealed, something that had been waiting just a little longer to be seen. The murmurs did not settle this time, they spread, like cracks through ice, like something long restrained finally breaking its surface. Poirot stood at the center of it, not leading, not commanding, but observing as the village began to shift around him in ways that could not be undone. Voices overlapped now. Fragments of memory, fragments of doubt. I always thought, he warned me. That night at the quarry, the constable turned slowly, taking it all in, not with panic, but with a tightening awareness that something irreversible had begun. And then a sound, sharp, sudden, from the far side of the square, a door slamming open. Bang, all heads turned. A young man, breathless, pale, stumbled forward from the direction of the post office. Sir, he called, his voice cracking slightly. Panting, sir, I checked, like you said, everything sent this morning. The constable's eyes locked onto him instantly. And, he demanded. The young man swallowed hard. There was something. A pause, sent early, before all this started. The air tightened. The constable stepped forward. What? The young man hesitated, glancing briefly at Poirot, then back. A package, he said. Silence. The word hung there, heavy. Addressed to, he faltered slightly, checking the slip in his hand, to the regional magistrate's office. A ripple tore through the crowd. Gasps. Poirot did not move, but his eyes sharpened. The constable's jaw tightened. And where is it now? He asked. Gone, the young man said. Sent out with the morning courier. It's already on the road. Silence. Deep. Unavoidable. The constable exhaled slowly. Controlled breath, then very quietly. You sent it. Poirot inclined his head slightly. We. Wimple blinked. You actually? Yes, Poirot said softly. A pause before we left the village. The realization spread quickly now, through the constable, through the crowd, through everyone. The ledger or something from it was no longer here, no longer containable. The constable looked at Poirot, and this time there was no calculation left, only clarity. You've done it, he said, not accusing, not admiring, just stating. Poirot met his gaze. Yes. A pause, and now, Poirot added quietly, the truth travels faster than you can. The wind picked up again, swirling lightly through the square, lifting loose papers, brushing against faces that now seemed more awake, more aware than they had been all morning. Shhhh, the constable closed his eyes briefly. Soft exhale, then opened them again, and something had changed, not softened, but shifted. You forced it, he said. Poirot said nothing, because that was true. And when it arrives, the constable continued, his voice lower now, quieter, it won't just touch me. A pause, it will tear through everything. The weight of that settled heavily, because everyone knew he wasn't wrong. Poirot's voice remained calm. Yes, no denial, no hesitation. Yes, the constable studied him, long, and then something unexpected. He nodded just once, a small, deliberate motion. As it should, he said. The words rippled outward, unexpected, unsettling. Wimple frowned. What are you saying? The constable glanced at him, then back to Poirot. I'm saying, he paused, searching not for words but for something more precise, that perhaps it should have happened a long time ago. Silence followed, not shocked, not loud, but deep, because now even he had stepped out of the shadow, not fully, not cleanly, but enough. Poirot watched him carefully, because this was not surrender. It was something more complicated, something human, a breath, a shift. And yet, Poirot said softly, you would have stopped it. The constable didn't deny it. Yes, a pause, because that was my role. Another silence, this one quieter, more reflective. The village no longer murmured as loudly now. The energy had changed again, not frantic, not chaotic, but focused, as though something had finally found its direction. The young man from the post office stood uncertainly at the edge, still holding the slip of paper, as though unsure whether to stay or disappear. Wimple leaned slightly on his cane. Tap slow, so what happens now? He asked. The question settled over everyone, because now the mystery had unfolded, the truth had been spoken. But the story, the consequences, had only just begun. Poirot looked around the square, at the faces, at the place that had tried so hard to remain untouched by its own past. And then he answered, quietly, clearly. Now, a pause, we wait. The wind moved again, softer this time. And somewhere in the distance, far beyond the village, a road stretched outward, carrying something unseen, unstoppable. And as the village of Bramblewick stood on the edge of what would come next, one thing remained certain. The dead had not only been remembered, they had ensured that they would never be forgotten again. The waiting began almost immediately, but it was not the still, quiet waiting of patience. It was restless, uneven, alive. Bramblewick did not return to normal. It could not. Doors remained open. Conversations lingered in the streets instead of behind curtains. Faces that had once turned away now held eye contact a moment too long, as though searching for something unspoken. And above it all, an invisible clock had begun to tick. Poirot stood near the edge of the square, his posture as composed as ever, yet his eyes missed nothing. Not the hushed exchanges near the bakery, not the way Mrs. Dalrymple clutched her teacup without drinking, not the constable who had moved slightly apart from the others, standing alone now, watching, not controlling, just watching. Wimple approached slowly. Tap, tap, steady now, you've unsettled them, he said. Poirot glanced at him. Non, he replied softly. They were already unsettled. A pause. I have only removed the illusion. Wimple let out a quiet breath. Sighs, and what happens when the truth arrives? He asked. Poirot's gaze drifted toward the distant road beyond the village. It does not arrive all at once, he said. It unfolds. The word lingered, because that was already happening. A voice broke through the quiet, not loud, but firm. I want to see it. Heads turned. The woman who had first spoken of Thomas Elridge stepped forward again, her hands no longer trembling quite so much. I want to see what he found, she said. A murmur followed, others nodded, quietly but decisively. The constable looked up at that, his expression unreadable. For a moment, just a moment, it seemed he might intervene, might reclaim something of the authority he had held, but he did not. Instead, he stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. "If it arrives," he said, his voice steady, "it will be handled officially." A ripple of tension. Wimple frowned. "Handled," the constable met his gaze. "Yes." A pause. "Properly." Poirot watched him closely, because that word properly carried weight, different now than before. "By whom?" Wimple pressed. The constable hesitated, just slightly, and in that hesitation something spoke, not deception, but uncertainty. Poirot stepped in gently. "By those," he said, "who can no longer ignore it." The constable glanced at him. A flicker passed between them, understanding, not agreement, but something close. A breath, then another interruption. This one quieter, but far more unsettling. A child standing near the edge of the square, small, still. "Mr. Pritchard came to our house," the child said softly. The crowd stilled instantly. The child's mother reached for him. "Thomas, don't," but he pulled back slightly. "He said something was hidden," the boy continued. "Quiet, steady," he said. "People were pretending not to see it." The silence deepened. Poirot turned slowly. His expression softened just slightly. "And what did you say to him?" Poirot asked gently. The boy shrugged. "I said grown-ups always pretend." A faint ripple passed through the crowd. Not laughter, not quite, but something close to recognition. Poirot inclined his head. "Très bien," he murmured, because sometimes the simplest truths are the hardest to confront. The constable looked away briefly, just briefly, as though that small voice had struck somewhere deeper than any accusation. Wimple let out a low breath. "Huff softly." "Well," he muttered, "that settles that." Poirot did not respond, because nothing was settled, not yet. The sky had begun to shift, clouds moving slowly across the light, dimming the edges of the village, softening its outlines. Time was passing, and still they waited. Until in the distance a sound, faint at first, then clearer. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on stone. Clatter, clatter. Heads turned. All at once, the road, a carriage, approaching, slowly, deliberately. The air tightened again. Because this was it, not the end, but the next step. The carriage drew closer, its dark frame cutting through the pale stretch of road, dust trailing faintly behind it. And as it neared the square, the village held its breath. Because whatever stepped out of that carriage would not just bring answers, it would bring consequence. And as Poirot stood there, calm and unshaken, his eyes fixed on its approach, one final thought settled quietly into place. Truth does not arrive gently, it arrives with weight. The carriage did not slow as it entered the square. It rolled in with quiet authority, wheels grinding softly against the cobblestones. Clatter, slow stop, no one moved, no one spoke. Even the wind seemed to retreat, as though unwilling to interfere with what was about to unfold. Poirot stood still, hands lightly clasped behind his back, his gaze steady, not on the carriage itself but on the door. Because that was where the next truth would emerge. The driver climbed down first, his movements efficient, practiced. He said nothing, merely stepped aside. Then the door opened. Creak, a man stepped out, tall, immaculate, his coat dark, his posture precise, his expression composed in that particular way that belongs only to those accustomed to authority. The magistrate. The air shifted instantly, not loudly, but definitively. He surveyed the square with a single measured glance, taking in the gathered villagers, the tension, the silence. Then his eyes settled on Poirot, and for a fraction of a second recognition flickered, not surprise, but awareness. "Ah," the magistrate said quietly. Poirot inclined his head. "Monsieur." The constable stepped forward at once. "Sir," he began, his voice controlled, "there's been—" "I am aware," the magistrate interrupted, his tone calm but absolute. A pause. "I received a most interesting delivery." The words landed, heavy, unavoidable. The constable's jaw tightened. Poirot said nothing, because now the truth had arrived. The magistrate stepped forward, his gaze moving slowly across the villagers. Not accusing, not questioning, but assessing. Then he spoke. "To whom does the name Thomas Elridge mean something?" he asked. Silence, then a hand, the woman from before, then another, and another. The ripples spread, because now no one pretended not to know. The magistrate nodded slightly. Good, he said, a pause. Then we begin with honesty. The word carried weight, different from before, sharper, real. He turned slightly to the constable. A brief glance. Step forward. The constable did, slowly, measured, but not resisting. Not now. You have held authority here, the magistrate said. Yes, sir. You were aware of certain irregularities. A pause. The constable did not answer immediately. Then, yes, the admission came clean, no hesitation. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The magistrate's gaze remained steady. And you chose not to act. Yes, another ripple, stronger, because now there was no ambiguity, no evasion, only truth. Poirot watched quietly, because this was the moment where silence no longer protected anyone. The magistrate nodded once. Very well, a pause. And this morning, the constable exhaled slowly. Controlled breath. This morning I intended to ensure that nothing further emerged. The words settled like stone. The magistrate studied him. Long then you failed. A simple statement, but it carried everything. The constable did not deny it. Yes, the magistrate turned, his gaze moving across the others. To those who acted, he said, step forward. The baker, slow, unsteady. Mrs. Henley, pale, composed again, but fragile. The woman with the missing glove, barely able to lift her head. One by one, they stepped into the open, not forced, not dragged, but drawn, because now there was nowhere left to hide. Poirot remained where he was, silent, observing, because his role was complete, or rather one part of it was. The magistrate spoke again. You believed, he said, that silence would preserve what you valued. A pause, but silence, his voice sharpened slightly, preserves nothing. The wind moved again, brushing through the square, stirring coats, lifting strands of hair, carrying the weight of the moment through every corner of the village. The magistrate turned once more, and this time his gaze settled fully on Poirot. You, he said, a pause, you ensured this reached me. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, the magistrate studied him. Then a faint, almost imperceptible nod. Good. The word was quiet, but it carried something rare, approval, not of chaos, but of clarity. Wimple exhaled slowly beside Poirot. Sighs. Well, he muttered, that's that then. Poirot did not respond, because it was not entirely. The magistrate spoke again, his voice carrying across the square. This matter will not end here, he said. A pause. It will extend beyond this village. A ripple of unease, because now the consequences were real, not abstract, not distant, but immediate. And every name within that ledger, he continued, will be examined. The words settled like thunder after lightning. Delayed, but inevitable. The constable closed his eyes briefly. Soft exhale. Mrs. Henley looked down. The baker trembled. The woman wept quietly. Sobs. The villagers stood in silence, because now the truth was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to something larger, something that would not forget. Poirot finally moved, just a single step forward, his voice quiet, measured. And the dead, he said softly, will no longer be ignored. The magistrate glanced at him, then nodded once. Yes, a pause. They will not. The wind passed once more through Bramblewick, but this time it carried no scent of almonds. Only the faint, shifting echo of something long buried, finally brought into the light. And yet, as the square slowly began to shift again, as officials moved forward, as names were spoken, as truths were recorded, Poirot's gaze drifted once more. Not to the magistrate, not to the accused, but to the village itself. Because even now, even after everything, there remained something subtle, something quiet, something not yet spoken, a final thread, waiting patiently to be pulled. Poirot did not follow the magistrate as he began issuing instructions. Nor did he linger among the villagers now stepping forward, their voices quieter, heavier, no longer whispers but statements, each one adding another weight to the air. Instead he moved, slowly, almost absently, toward the edge of the square. As though some faint, persistent thought had not yet released him. Wimple noticed. Of course he did. Where are you going now? He muttered, following at a slower pace. Tap, tap. Poirot did not answer immediately. His eyes had shifted, not to the people, not to the officials, but to the buildings. The familiar shapes of Bramblewick, the florist, the bakery, the general store, each one now holding a different meaning, each one connected. Mon ami, Poirot said quietly, almost to himself, there is always one detail that resists. Wimple frowned. Resists what? Poirot stopped, just for a moment. Completion, he said. The word lingered, because even now, even after confessions, revelations, exposure, something remained unsettled. Wimple shifted his weight. Tap stops. You're telling me after all that? He gestured vaguely back toward the square. You think there's still more? Poirot turned his head slightly. And his eyes were sharp again. Yes, a pause, there is always more. The wind brushed lightly through the street, softer now, carrying only the ordinary scents of the village, bread, stone, damp earth, but Poirot did not inhale it. He was listening, not with his ears, but with something deeper. He began walking again, this time toward the bakery. Wimple blinked. The bakery, Poirot did not slow. Yes, they reached it quickly. The door stood half open, unattended. Inside, the familiar warmth lingered, but it felt different now, disturbed. Poirot stepped inside. Wimple followed reluctantly. Tap cautious, you already caught him, Wimple said. The baker, he confessed. Yes, Poirot said, but not entirely. Wimple frowned. What do you mean? Poirot moved slowly through the space. His gaze sweeping over the counters, the shelves, the tools, everything in order, too much in order. He stopped near the work table, ran a gloved finger lightly along its edge. Clean. Recently, curious, he murmured. Wimple crossed his arms. What is? Poirot turned slightly. The baker, he said, claimed he misjudged the quantity. Yes, and yet, Poirot tilted his head. He is a man who measures precisely. A pause. Wimple shrugged. Even careful men make mistakes. Poirot's eyes flicked to him. Do they? He asked softly. The question lingered. Then Poirot moved again, toward a small shelf near the back, jars, containers, ingredients. He scanned them quickly. Then stopped there, a small tin, unlabeled, set slightly apart from the others. Poirot reached for it carefully, opened it. Inside, a fine powder. Pale, innocent-looking. Wimple leaned closer. What is that? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he dipped the tip of a glove lightly into it, examined the texture, then very faintly he brought it closer. Inhaled softly, his eyes narrowed. Almond, he said. Wimple stiffened. More of it. Poirot shook his head slowly. Non. A pause. Not the same. The distinction hung. Wimple frowned. What do you mean not the same? Poirot closed the tin gently, set it back exactly where it had been, then turned, his gaze sharper now, more focused. The baker, he said quietly, did not act alone. Wimple blinked. We already know that Bellamy misses Henley. No, Poirot said, not sharply but firmly. I mean in the preparation. A pause. In the knowledge. The air shifted. Subtle, but real. Wimple's grip tightened on his cane. Hat presumes slower. You think someone else. Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice. I think, he said, that the substance given to Monsieur Bellamy, a pause, was not what he believed it to be. Silence. Wimple stared at him. Then what was it? Poirot's gaze drifted back to the tin. To ensure death, he said softly, one must be certain. A pause, and certainty, his eyes darkened slightly, does not come from guesswork. The implication settled, cold, precise. Wimple's voice dropped. You're saying someone knew exactly what they were doing? Poirot nodded once. Yes, a breath, and ensured that it would succeed. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before, because now this was no longer a chain of fear-driven decisions, no longer a tragic escalation, but something else, something deliberate, planned, calculated. Poirot turned slowly, back toward the doorway, back toward the square, where voices still carried faintly, where the magistrate continued his work. Where the village believed that the truth had been uncovered, but Poirot knew it had not fully. He stepped toward the door. Wimple followed, unease growing in his expression. Poirot, he said quietly. Poirot paused at the threshold. Then without turning, there is one more, he said. A pause, one who has not spoken. The words slipped into the air like a shadow. Wimple swallowed. Breath tight. Who? Poirot's eyes lifted slightly, toward the square, toward the gathered figures. And then very slowly they settled, on someone who had stood there all along, present, calm, unremarkable, and completely unquestioned. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. Someone, a pause, who never needed to speak. And as his gaze locked into place, the final thread tightened. Poirot did not move for several seconds. He simply stood there in the doorway of the bakery, the soft light behind him, his figure still, but his mind racing with absolute clarity. Because now there were no more missing pieces, only the final arrangement. Wimple followed his gaze, his breath shallow. Inhale slowly. Who is it? He whispered. Poirot stepped forward, back into the square, back into the center of everything. The voices began to quiet again as he moved, one by one, conversations fading, attention shifting, the subtle gravity of his presence pulling the moment inward. The magistrate noticed, turned, waited. Even the constable, now no longer commanding but standing among them, looked up. Poirot stopped, right in the center, and then very gently he spoke. "There is," he said, "one final matter." The words rippled outward, not loud but precise. Everyone stilled because they felt it, the weight of it, the last thread. The magistrate inclined his head slightly. "Go on." Poirot's gaze moved slowly across the gathered faces, measured, certain. "You have heard," he said, "of fear of silence, of decisions made in haste." A pause. "You have seen how one act led to another, how intention became consequence." His eyes sharpened. But this, a beat, was not only that. The constable frowned slightly. "What are you saying?" Poirot turned, and this time he did not hesitate. "This was ensured," he said. "Silence, a deeper kind, because that word, it changed everything." The magistrate's expression tightened. "By whom?" Poirot's gaze lifted and settled. "By the one," he said quietly, "who understood from the very beginning that if the truth were to emerge," a pause, "it must do so completely." The crowd shifted, confused, uneasy. Wimple's voice came low. "Poirot," but Poirot did not look away, because now the truth stood plainly before him. "You," Poirot said, and every eye followed his gaze. To the magistrate, a collective breath, sharp, stunned. Gasps. The magistrate did not move, did not react immediately. But something subtle passed through his expression, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "That is a serious accusation," the magistrate said calmly. Poirot inclined his head. "Non," he replied softly. "It is a serious conclusion. Silence, absolute. You received the ledger," Poirot continued. "Yes, yes, and you came immediately." "Yes." A pause. "Too immediately." The magistrate's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" Poirot stepped forward. "One does not arrive so quickly unless one is already prepared." A ripple moved through the crowd. The constable stared. "That's, and more importantly," Poirot continued, his voice tightening ever so slightly, "one does not act with such certainty unless one already knows what will be found." The magistrate said nothing, but his silence spoke. "You were named," Poirot said quietly, a breath, "in the ledger." The words dropped like stone, heavy, final. Wimple staggered slightly. "Tap falters, no," he whispered. The magistrate exhaled slowly. Soft breath. Then for the first time he smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but knowingly. "I wondered," he said, "if you would see it." A shiver passed through the square. The constable stepped back instinctively. "You," he started. "Yes," the magistrate said simply. A pause. "I ensured it." The words echoed, cold, controlled. "Why?" Wimple demanded, his voice breaking. "Why let all this happen?" The magistrate's gaze moved across them. Measured, detached. "Because it was already happening," he said. A pause. "Rot does not disappear because one refuses to see it." Poirot watched him carefully. "And so," he said, "you allowed it to unfold." "Yes." Another pause. "I allowed each of you," the magistrate continued, "to reveal yourselves." His eyes flicked briefly to Bellamy, to Mrs. Henley, to the baker, to act exactly as you would. Silence. "You manipulated them," the constable said. The magistrate tilted his head slightly. "I observed them." Poirot's voice came softer now. "But you ensured the outcome." A pause. The magistrate met his gaze. "Yes." The admission settled like ice. "Because partial truth," the magistrate continued, "changes nothing." A breath. "But complete truth," his eyes darkened slightly, "destroys illusion." The village stood frozen, because now everything had shifted again. The truth had not simply emerged, it had been engineered. Poirot studied him. Long, carefully. "And you," he said, "placed yourself outside of it." A faint smile. "On the contrary," the magistrate replied. A pause. "I placed myself at its center." The weight of that lingered, because now no one was untouched, not even the one who had brought the truth forward. The constable shook his head slowly. Breath unsteady. This isn't justice." The magistrate looked at him. "No," he said, "it is truth." Silence. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. Soft exhale, then opened them again, calm, steady. "And now?" he asked. The magistrate considered that. "Then, for the first time," he said quietly, "we proceed without illusion." The wind moved through Bramblewick once more, but now it felt different, not heavy, not suffocating, but clear, unforgiving, honest. The villagers stood in silence, because nothing would return to what it had been. Not the streets, not the people, not the quiet lies they had once lived within. Poirot stepped back slightly, his role finally complete. But the story, the consequences, the truth would continue. Long after this moment, long after this day. And as the camera of imagination slowly pulls back from the square, from the village, from the faces forever changed, one truth remains: the dead do not forget. And neither should we. If you felt the tension, if you followed every twist, if this story kept you listening till the very last moment, then don't let it end here. Like the story, share it with someone who loves mysteries. And subscribe, because the next secret is already waiting to be uncovered.